Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Trinity 7 and built a harem with Lilith, Arin, and Levi? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Nameless King and the Crimson Queen. The first thing he registered was the color. A sun the color of a fresh wound bled across a sky of bruised violet and black. It was wrong. Fundamentally, axiomatically wrong. The sun should be gold. The sky blue. This was the color of a world dying. Naruto Uzumaki pushed himself up, the grit of unnatural black sand scraping against his palms. He wasn't in the mud and rain of the Valley of the End. He wasn't locked in a final, desperate struggle with the person he once called brother. That moment, a lifetime of pain and resolve compressed into a single, sorrowful strike. Felt like a dream half remembered, a scar on a soul he wasn't sure he still possessed. He remembered the blinding light, the sensation of being unmade, atom by atom, and then, this. Silence. A profound, unnatural quiet that drank sound. He stood in the center of a crater, but the edges weren't rock and earth. They were a bizarre, crystalline geometry of frozen, half-formed shapes, a house melting into a tree. A road spiraling into nothingness. The air itself thrummed, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in his teeth. It felt like static electricity, only instead of a mild shock, it promised dissolution. Annihilation. Panic was a distant instinct, a ghost from a past life. The boy who would have screamed and flailed was gone, burned away in the crucible of a war that had demanded everything from him. What remained was a man forged in that fire. And his first reaction was not fear, but analysis. He closed his eyes, sinking into a meditative state he'd honed on the back of a turtle and in the presence of frogs. He let the thrumming energy of this place wash over him, not fighting it, but tasting it. It was chaos, pure, undirected power. It was the antithesis of the natural energy he knew, the lifeblood of the world he'd fought to protect. This energy was a cancer, consuming and corrupting reality. It reminded him, faintly, of the corrosive chakra of the 10 tails, but without the malevolent will. This was simply entropy given form. It was a breakdown phenomenon. He didn't know the term, but he understood the concept. This place was coming apart, and it was trying to take him with it. The chaotic energy licked at the edges of his being, pulling, unraveling. But it met a wall. Deep within him, a core of power, familiar and yet fundamentally altered, pulsed with a steady, golden light. It was his own chakra, saturated with the sage energy that had become as natural as breathing, but it was more. It was a wellspring, an infinite font of life and will. As the entropic energy pulled, his own power pushed back, not with force, but with a simple, undeniable declaration of existence. I am here. He could feel the chaos coalescing, preparing to collapse inward and obliterate everything. Himself included. An old instinct, muscle memory from 1,000 battles, took over. Don't block it, redirect it, control it. He opened his eyes and extended his right hand, palm up. He didn't try to gather the natural energy of the world, there was none. He pulled on the cancerous, chaotic hum itself. He dipped his fingers into the river of uncreation and began to spin it. It fought him, a wild beast bucking and snarling, threatening to tear his arm from its socket. But his will, forged by hardship and loss, was a chain of adamant. He imposed his own order on it, his own rotation. The chaotic crimson-black energy was forced into a spiral, compressed by an invisible shell of his own golden life force. It shrieked, a sound that was felt more than heard, a protest against the very concept of order. A sphere of violent, swirling darkness, no bigger than his fist, formed in his palm. It was a Rasengan, but not a dark star of pure destruction, caged and tamed. He didn't slam it into anything. He simply held it, and by containing its core, he stabilized the entire area. The thrumming lessened. The world, for 100-meter radius around him, stopped dissolving. It was in that moment of absolute control that she arrived. A flicker of movement, and she was there, standing at the crater's edge. She was a splash of vibrant color in this monochrome ruin, a mane of crimson hair. A crisp white uniform-like blouse, a black tie and skirt. Her eyes, the same shade as her hair, were wide with a disbelief that she quickly wrestled behind a mask of professional authority. In her hand, she held a strange object, a complex piece of metal that looked vaguely like a pistol, but its design was too intricate, too elegant for a simple firearm. She didn't speak. She was assessing. Her gaze flickered from his face, impossibly young, yet holding eyes that were ancient, to the sphere of contained oblivion in his hand, and back again. The sight of it made the skin on her arms pebble. No magus, not even the headmaster, could manipulate the raw energy of a breakdown phenomenon with such nonchalant mastery. They contained it, sealed it, or fled from it. They did not hold it in their palm like a trinket. Naruto met her gaze. He felt no hostility from her, only shock and a deep, humming well of power that was disciplined and refined. She was strong. He held her stare for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, he clenched his fist. The dark sphere imploded, not with a bang, but with a soft whump of displaced air, vanishing into nothing. The last of the unnatural pressure in the area dissipated, leaving only the dying red sun and the black sand. "Who are you?" Her voice was smooth, controlled, but an undercurrent of tension betrayed her shock. It was the voice of someone used to being in command, who had just witnessed something that broke every rule she knew. He looked at his empty palm, then back to her. He didn't have a good answer. "Naruto," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after an eternity of silence. Just Naruto. The woman, Lilith Asami, kept her grimoire, Hermes Apocrypha, aimed at the boy. It wasn't an act of aggression, but of caution. A reflex. In her years as a professor at the Royal Biblia Academy, and a member of the Trinity 7, she had seen countless manifestations of magic. She had faced rogue magi, chimeras born of failed experiments, and the mindless monsters spat out by breakdown phenomena. This was none of those. This boy stood in the epicenter of a grade 3 collapse, a phenomenon that should have erased him from existence. And looked as if he'd just woken from a nap during which he had apparently tamed a miniature black hole. "Just Naruto," she repeated, her tone flat. "People don't just wake up in the middle of a breakdown. Naruto. And they certainly don't play with the energy that causes them." He gave a slight, wry smile that didn't quite reach his world-weary eyes. "It felt wrong," he said, his voice a calm baritone that was at odds with his teenage appearance. "The way everything was pulling apart. So I fixed it." Lilith's carefully constructed composure almost cracked. "Fixed it." He said it with the casualness of someone tightening a loose screw. She had dedicated her life to the study of magic, to the Logos arts, to understanding and combating these phenomena. The idea of fixing one was as absurd as punching the ocean until it was dry. "What you did," she said, slowly lowering her grimoire, "is considered impossible." "It's not the first time I've heard that," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the crystalline wreckage. He looked at the melting house, his expression turning somber. "Was anyone here?" The question caught her off guard. Most magi, especially those with immense power, were concerned with the what and the how. Their own survival, the scale of the event, the classification of the magic. This boy's first concern was for potential victims. It was unexpectedly human. "The area was evacuated hours ago," she said, her voice softening manivally. "The magical signature of the developing phenomenon was detected early. You're the only one who was inside the quarantine zone. How did you get here?" Naruto's brow furrowed. "I don't know. I was somewhere else. Then I was here." The memory of rain and lightning and a devastating farewell flickered behind his eyes. He pushed it down. "My home is gone. I think this is what was left." Lilith processed this. It was a common enough story for those who awakened to their magical potential. A spontaneous activation, a localized breakdown, the loss of Enjihov's mundane life. But the scale was all wrong. A new Magus awakening didn't cause a grade 3 event. And they didn't emerge from the rubble with the power and control of an archmagus. "You need to come with me," she stated. It wasn't a request. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, his calm acceptance more disarming than any protest would have been. "Where are we going?" "To a place for people like you," she said, turning. "A place where you can learn to understand what you are." He fell into step beside her, his strides long and easy. The why walked in silence through the warped landscape. He was a paradox she couldn't solve. He wore simple black pants and a tattered orange and black jacket, clothes that looked ping-fan but were caked in the dust of a world that no longer existed. He carried no grimoire, no magical focus, yet he had commanded reality with his bare hands. As they reached the edge of the quarantine perimeter, where Hyonsal began to reassert itself, Lilith created a transport sigil on the ground, a glowing circle of intricate crimson runes. Naruto watched, his head tilted with genuine curiosity. "That's teleportation magic, right?" he asked. "A jutsu for moving through space." The word, jutsu, was foreign, but she understood the context. "A spell, yes. Have you seen it before?" "Something like it," he said, his gaze distant. "The seals are different, but the principle is the same. You're defining 2 points in space and creating a temporary bridge." His analysis was so accurate, so instantaneous, that it sent another jolt of shock through her. First-year students spent months trying to grasp that basic theory. "You seem to know a lot for someone who just woke up in a crater," she observed, her eyes narrowing slightly. He shrugged, a simple, disarming gesture. "When your life depends on understanding how things work, you learn to watch closely." The light condecoes them, and the world dissolved into a tunnel of rushing color. For Lilith, it was a routine commute. For Naruto, it was a moment of intense data gathering. He felt the flow of mana, the way Lilith's will was the key that turned the lock of space-time. He felt her power, vast and deep like a placid lake, but he could also feel its limits. And he could feel his own, a boundless, churning ocean by comparison. The disparity was so great it was almost comical. They reappeared in a grand, sunlit courtyard. The air was clean, filled with the scent of flowers and the distant sound of a bell. Before them, a sprawling complex of buildings rose into the sky. A fusion of Gothic architecture and modern design. And the entire complex, courtyard and all, was situated on an island floating in an endless blue sky. Naruto's eyes widened, just for a second, the first crack in his stoic demeanor. He had seen villages hidden in mountains and forests, but a school floating in the clouds was new. "Welcome to the Royal Biblia Academy," Lilith announced, a hint of pride in her voice. As they walked across the manicured lawns, Naruto became acutely aware of the stares. Students aisle in their uniforms, a mix of styles and colors, paused to watch them. They weren't just looking at Lilith, a figure of authority and renown. They were staring at him. At the boy in the strange, tattered clothes, walking beside one of the Trinity 7. He ignored the whispers, the pointing fingers. His senses, honed to a razor's edge, were focused on Bole's substantial threats. And he felt too. Not threats, precisely. More like points of intense focus. From a bench beneath a large oak tree, he felt a gaze that was cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. He glanced over and saw a girl with long, dark hair and a placid, doll-like face. She held a book accessorios, but her eyes, a deep violet, were locked onto him, seemingly dissecting him layer by layer. The second gaze came from the shadows of a cloistered walkway. It was sharper, more predatory. He didn't need to look to know its nature. It was the gaze of a warrior sizing up a potential rival. He flickered his eyes in that direction and saw a flash of blue hair and a lean, athletic frame. The girl was leaning against a pillar, arms crossed. Her posture one of relaxed readiness. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, weren't just looking at him. They were memorizing his posture, his gait, the way he carried himself. She recognized a fellow predator. He filed the information away. The calculating one and the warrior one. Interesting. Lilith led him into the main building, through halls of polished marble and stained glass, to a large, imposing set of doors. "The headmaster will want to see you." The headmaster's office was less an office and more a library that someone happened to live in. Bookshelves, stretched to a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Globes Cori, celestial models rotated in midair, and the air smelled of old paper, ozone, and tea. Behind a massive, cluttered desk sat a man who looked both ancient and ageless. He had a kind face, a long white beard, and eyes that twinkled with a power that made the air around him feel heavy. "Ah, Lilith," the headmaster said, his voice a gentle rumble. "I felt the signature digine of your transport spell. And I sense you've brought us a guest of considerable significance." His gaze settled on Naruto, and the twinkling in his eyes sharpened to a piercing intensity. Headmaster, Lilith said with a respectful bow. I found him at the center of the Keter class breakdown. He had stabilized it. The headmaster's eyebrows rose. Stabilized. Not sealed. Not dispersed. He was holding the core of it in his hand. Headmaster, Lilith stated, her voice tight with remembered awe. And then he dismissed it. The old man was silent for a long time. His fingers steepled before him. He studied Naruto, who stood calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Remarkable, the headmaster breathed. He turned his full attention to Naruto. Young man, you possess a vast and uncontrolled magical power. An awakening of this magnitude classifies you as a demon lord candidate. Do you know what that means? Naruto's expression was neutral. The guy with the red hair mentioned I was in a place for people like me. I'm guessing it has to do with this magic you're talking about. And this demon lord title sounds like a problem. The headmaster chuckled. An astute observation. A demon lord is an existence that brings about destruction. Their very presence can warp reality, creating the breakdown phenomena you just experienced. This Acade, exists to find candidates like yourself and teach them to control their power, to prevent such destruction. To choose a purpose for their magic, and integrate themselves into the world's laws. Naruto's eyes narrowed. So this power only destroys. Is that all it's for? The question was quiet, but it resonated with the vast room. He thought of the Rasengan, a tool that could both save a village and end a life. He thought of Sage Mode, a power of nature that could be used for creation or annihilation. Power is power, boy, the headmaster said gently. Its nature is to be. Its effect is often chaos. We teach our students to give it form and purpose, lest it consume them and the world around them. I've seen great power used to protect, Naruto stated, his voice ringing with a conviction that was absolute. And I've seen it used to destroy. The power wasn't the problem. The will of the person wielding it was. A profound silence filled the office. Lilith looked at Naruto, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. This wasn't the arrogance of a newly awakened magus. This was the wisdom of a veteran, spoken from the mouth of a boy. The headmaster smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. Indeed, a truth many powerful magi forget. It seems you are already ahead of our first-year curriculum. He leaned forward. However, your power is still a risk. To be accepted into this academy, you must pass an entrance exam. To prove you have Kalari disposition, if not the training, to control your abilities. Naruto nodded. Fine. What do I have to do? The examination was held in a massive, domed chamber beneath the academy. The ceiling was a projection of the real sky outside, and the floor was a seamless expanse of white stone. In the center of the chamber floated a large, multifaceted crystal. About the size of a man. It pulsed with a soft, internal light. Several other late-enrolling students were there, looking nervous. Lilith stood with a group of other professors, including the doll-faced girl and the blue-haired warrior Naruto had noticed earlier. He now knew them as Arin Kanazuki and Levi Kazama, two other members of the Trinity 7. Arin's gaze was fixed on the crystal, her expression unreadable. Levi, however, was watching Naruto, a small, knowing smirk on her face. This was going to be interesting. A stern-looking professor explained the test. This is a mana-reactive crystal. You will place your hand upon it and channel your magic. The goal is to make the crystal resonate with your power and glow with your magical color. It is a test of control, not raw output. Pouring in too much power without discipline will overload it, resulting in failure. Too little, and you will achieve nothing. You may begin. One by one, the other students tried. A boy with slicked back hair made the crystal glow a faint green before it flickered out. A girl in a frilly dress managed a steady, if weak, pulse of pink light. Most failed, their power sputtering, or causing the crystal to shudder violently before the proctor cut them off. Finally, it was Naruto's turn. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. He didn't immediately place his hand on the crystal. Instead, he walked around it, observing it from all angles. He could feel the intricate web of magical energy in it, the channels designed to absorb and display power. It was a finely tuned instrument. A direct, brutish application of force would be like trying to play a violin with a sledgehammer. He's analyzing it, Levi murmured to Arin, her smirk widening. He's not just some brute. Arin remained silent, but her violet eyes narrowed in concentration. The boy's actions were logical, but the energy she felt accessorios from him was anything but. It was a chaotic storm barely contained within a human form. It made no sense. Naruto stopped in front of the crystal. He looked over at Lilith, who gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. He took a breath, and placed his right hand on the crystal's cool surface. He closed his eyes and reached inward, to the churning ocean of power within him. He didn't unleash it. He let a single, controlled stream flow from his palm into the crystal. The crystal flared to life. But it wasn't a single color. It was a blinding, furious crimson, the color of a demon lord's magic. It was so intense, so potent, that several of the professors took an involuntary step back. The crystal began to vibrate, a deep hum filling the chamber. Too much. The proctor yelled. He's going to shatter it. Cut the connection. But Lilith held up a hand. Wait. Naruto didn't open his eyes. He could feel the crystal straining, the pathways overloading. The proctor was right. This was a test of finesse, and he was using a fire hose. But he wasn't finished. This is a stupid test, he muttered, just loud enough for himself to hear. Measuring a river with a teacup. He needed a second hand. A second point of contact to balance the flow. And he knew just how to make one. He kept his right hand on the crystal, the furious crimson energy still pouring into it. Then, he focused his will. He pictured himself, every detail, every scar, every ounce of his being. He didn't just imagine it. He commanded it to exist. He pulled on the raw, living energy of his soul, the golden power Sumgyojin beneath the crimson, and gave it form. Beside him, mana coalesced. It wasn't a wispy illusion or a spectral copy. It was solid. Flesh, bone, and fabric were woven from pure magical energy. In a silent puff of smoke, an exact duplicate of Naruto stood beside him. The shadow clone, reborn in a world of magic. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The headmaster, watching from an observation deck, leaned forward, his teacup forgotten. Levi's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Arin's emotionless facade finally broke, her mouth falling slightly agape. Creating a solid, autonomous, sentient construct from pure mana, it was the work of a god, not a student. The clone gave the original a nod, then placed its left hand on the opposite side of the crystal. The effect was instantaneous. The clone didn't channel more crimson energy. It channeled the other half of Naruto's power, the golden life force. The crystal, which had been seconds from shattering under the strain of the destructive crimson, was suddenly suffused with a gentle, brilliant gold. The two energies didn't fight. They flowed together, the crimson providing the raw power, the gold providing the structure and control. They chased each other through the crystal's facets, a perfect, harmonious dance of creation and destruction. The violent humming stopped, replaced by a clear, resonant tone, like a perfectly struck bell. The crystal didn't just glow, it became a miniature star, a swirling vortex of crimson and gold, bathing the entire chamber in its breathtaking light. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly impossible. Naruto and his clone held the connection for 5 long seconds. The resonant tone holding steady. Then, as one, they removed their hands. The clone dissolved in another silent puff of smoke, and the light within the crystal gently faded, leaving it unharmed. Its internal light seeming to pulse brighter than before. Silence. A dead, absolute silence that stretched for an uncomfortably long time. Every student, every professor, in awe. The headmaster was the first to break it, his voice broadcast into the chamber. "Mr. Uzumaki," he said, his tone thick with a wonder he couldn't hide. "Every magus must choose a tema for their magic. A ruling principle, an archive of study. What will yours be?" Naruto opened his eyes. He felt the gazes on him, a mixture of fear, awe, and respect. He was an anomaly, a monster, a king. He looked at Lilith, whose red eyes were wide with a million questions. He looked at Levi, who was now grinning, a predatory fire lit in her eyes. He looked at Arin, who was watching him with an intensity that was almost frightening. As if she was seeing the solution to an unsolvable equation. He would not be a destroyer. He would not be a pawn. He would not be defined by their rules or their fears. He knew what his power was for. It was for leading, For protecting. For building. For ensuring that what he cared for would never be lost again. He met the headmaster's unseen gaze, his voice calm but ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. Emperor, he declared, to command. From her place among the professors, Lilith Asami felt a shiver run down her spine. It was not a shiver of fear. It was a shiver of premonition. She had been assigned as this boy's personal instructor, teacher and student. But as she looked at Naruto Uzumaki, standing alone in the center of the room, radiating a power and a presence that dwarfed everyone, she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was not looking at a student. She was looking at a sovereign. In his private office, the headmaster stared at the screen showing the silent chamber. Selena, his most trusted researcher, stood beside him. A perfect, solid-state construct, Selena breathed, replaying the footage of the clone's creation. The mana expenditure should have been astronomical, it should have drained him completely. But our sensors show his reserves barely dipped. It's not the quantity that worries me, Selena, the headmaster said, his voice grim. He pointed to a spectral analysis of the energy signature. It showed the raging peak of crimson, but intertwined with it, a steady, rhythmic wave of pure gold. A demon lord's magic is of the Superbia archive. It is ego. It is a void that consumes. It cannot create life. It cannot build. He zoomed in on the golden signature. That energy, it behaved as if it were from the Vita archive. The archive of life itself. But that is a lost art, a power closer to the divine than to mortal magic. He stood and walked to his window, looking out at his floating academy, his sanctuary of knowledge. He had built this place to contain and guide threats. But what he had just witnessed was not a threat he could simply contain. A demon lord with the power of creation, he whispered to the sky. The potential to command destruction, and the will to command life. What have we found, Lilith? A savior, or the architect of our end? The die had been cast. A nameless king had arrived at Royal Biblia. And his presence was a declaration. The old rules no longer applied. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Way of the Shadow and the Will to Command. News in a school travels faster than any teleportation spell. News of an impossible feat travels at the speed of thought. By the time the sun had set on Naruto's first day, every student, professor, and floating gargoyle in the Royal Biblia Academy knew his name. Naruto Uzumaki, the anomaly, the boy who had created a perfect, solid clone and commanded two opposing magical forces in perfect harmony. The one who had declared his Tama to be emperor. The whispers followed him like a cloak. In the grand dining hall that evening, a space that could have comfortably hosted a royal banquet for a small nation, tables of students would fall silent as he walked past. He was an island of quiet in a sea of murmuring. Lilith had guided him there, her expression a mixture of professional duty and private exasperation. She had assigned him a room in the faculty wing, a temporary measure, she'd insisted, until his student dorm was ready, but it felt more like quarantine. He ignored the stares, focusing on the plate of food in front of him. It was delicious, far better than the instant ramen that had been his staple for years, but he ate with a mechanical efficiency born of battlefield rations. He wasn't oblivious to the attention, he was simply compartmentalizing. The fear in their eyes was familiar. He'd seen it his whole life. First, it was the gaze reserved for the demon container. Then, it was the awe mixed with terror for the war hero who held unimaginable power. This was just a new flavor of the same old dish. Lilith sat across from him, picking at a salad. The teacher-student pretense was already wearing thin. "You've made an impression," she said. Her voice a low murmur that wouldn't carry. "That wasn't the goal," he replied, not looking up from his plate. "The goal was to pass the test. You didn't pass it. You redefined it," she countered. A hint of accusation in her tone. "Creating a sentient golem, a perfect physical duplicate, that's not student-level magic, Naruto. That's a legend. Some grimoires theorize it's the pinnacle of the Cretio archive. I just needed a second hand," he said with a shrug. He finished his meal and finally met her gaze. Her crimson eyes were intense, searching. "You said this place was to learn control. I showed control. The crystal didn't break." Her lips thinned. He was being deliberately obtuse, and they both knew it. "The headmaster has assigned me as your personal instructor. Your classes will begin tomorrow. We'll start with the fundamentals of Logos Arts theory, magical energy circulation, and world law axioms. Naruto leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He looked less like a student receiving a schedule and more like a general being briefed on unfavorable terrain. Fine, but I have questions of my own. This, Demon Lord, business. The headmaster said they caused destruction. Why? Lilith was taken aback. The concentration of their power overwhelms the laws of the world. It's a natural consequence, like a star collapsing into a black hole. So it's not a choice. Naruto pressed. They don't wake up one day and decide to break everything. It just happens. In essence, yes, she said. That's why our role is so critical. We guide them, teach them to choose a tema, to give their power a purpose that aligns with the world's laws and prevents that collapse. And if their purpose doesn't align, the question hung in the air between them. Lilith's expression turned serious. Then they become a threat. And threats are eliminated. Naruto's eyes hardened, a flicker of a terrible memory in their depths. A valley filled with rain. A friend he had failed to save. And a world he'd been forced to sacrifice him for. So you train them, and if they don't learn the right way, you kill them. You're not a school. You're a processing facility with a fail-safe. That's a cynical way of looking at it, Lilith shot back, her voice sharp. It's the truthful way of looking at it, he replied, his tone devoid of heat but heavy with certainty. I've seen it before. People given power they don't understand, pushed into a corner by those who fear them, and then condemned when they lash out. He stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Thank you for the meal, teacher. I'm going to get some air. He left her there, sitting amidst the whispers, his words echoing in her mind. She had spent her entire adult life dedicated to the Academy's mission, believing in it, upholding it, and in one conversation, this boy, this impossible anomaly, had stripped it down to its most brutal, pragmatic core and held it up for her to see. It was ugly, and it was true. And she hated him for it. Naruto found his way to one of the Academy's many courtyards, a tranquil space with a gurgling fountain and manicured hedges under the light of 2 moons. He sat on the fountain's edge, the cool stone a welcome anchor. This world was so different, yet the politics of power felt sickeningly familiar. He was once again the Jinchuriki, the weapon to be controlled or discarded. He closed his eyes, sensing the world around him. He felt the life in the grass, the hum of the magical lamps, the distant thrum of the Academy's core enchantments. And he felt the approach. A swift, silent presence moving with the fluid grace of a stalking cat. You're good, a voice said from the shadows. I was trying to be quiet. Levi Kazama stepped into the moonlight, her blue hair looking almost silver. She wore a modified version of the school uniform, more practical for movement, and her arms were crossed over her chest. Her smile was a sharp, knowing slash. Most magi are so busy sensing mana they forget to just listen. I listen to everything, Naruto replied, not bothering to turn. Breathing, footsteps, intent. Your intent is loud, she laughed, a short, throaty sound. Is it? And what's my loud intent telling you? She sauntered over and leaned against the fountain opposite him, her hip cocked. You're here to measure me, he said simply. You saw what happened in the exam chamber. I'm a variable you can't quantify. You're a warrior. You don't like unknowns on your battlefield. Levi's smile widened into a full-blown grin. She was genuinely delighted. Damn, you are good. She pushed off the fountain and took a step closer, her energy shifting from casual to focused. The headmaster and the professors can talk theory all day. They can analyze your mana signature and debate your tema until the sky falls. But I only care about one thing. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, locked onto his. In a fight, what can you do? What are your limits? How do you break? You think you can find out? Naruto asked, a challenge in his own voice. He finally turned to face her fully. I'm the best close quarters combat specialist in the academy. In the world, maybe, she said. Not with arrogance, but with the simple confidence of fact. My tema is expectatio. I perceive, I anticipate, I act. When it comes to a fight, I'm always one step ahead. So, yes, I think I can find out. Quote, he stood up, mirroring her posture. The tranquil courtyard suddenly felt like a dueling ring. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with magic. and everything to do with the primal energy of two predators meeting. "All right," Naruto said, a slow grin spreading across his own face. It was the first genuine smile he'd shown since arriving. He understood. This was a language he was fluent in. "But if we're going to do this, we do it properly. Not hiding in a garden." "I like the way you think," Levi shot back. "Main combat arena. Tomorrow. After morning classes. Don't be late." She gave him a wink, a gesture that was both a flirtation and a threat, and then vanished. Not with a spell, but with pure, unadulterated speed, a flicker of motion too fast for a normal eye to track. Naruto stood alone, the grin still on his face. The fear and politics were exhausting. A straightforward fight, that felt like coming home. The next day, the main combat arena was packed. The challenge had been officially sanctioned by the headmaster. Better a controlled duel than a clandestine brawl that could level half the school, and the entire student body seemed to be in attendance. They filled the tiered seats that overlooked the massive, circular stone stage. High above, in a private observation box, Lilith stood with Arin, her arms crossed tightly. "This is reckless," Lilith muttered, her gaze fixed on the arena floor where Naruto was stretching, loose and relaxed. "He's been here for less than 48 hours. He doesn't understand our rules of engagement." Levi won't hold back. "Your logic is flawed," Arin said, her voice its usual monotone, but her eyes were glued to Naruto. "Observation is the most effective method of data acquisition. Levi's actions are optimal for assessing the subject's combat capabilities. The risk is calculated. He's not a subject, Arin, he's my student. His power signature classifies him as a Demon Lord candidate. My designated partner," Arin corrected, a hint of something possessive in her tone. "His potential to cause a global-scale phenomenon makes him a subject of primary interest to all of us." Lilith fell silent, unable to argue with the cold, hard truth. Down on the stage, Levi faced Naruto from 100 meters away. She was in her combat attire, a sleek, form-fitting black and BL.UE outfit that allowed for maximum mobility. She held no grimoire. Like Naruto, her body was her primary weapon. "Ready for your first lesson, transfer student," Levi called out, her voice echoing in the arena. "Always ready to learn something new," Naruto called back, settling into a low fighting stance that was utterly alien to the Magi watching. It was the basic academy stance from Konoha, Bala, NCED, and ready to spring in any direction. The headmaster's voice boomed from unseen speakers. "This is an official duel to gauge combat proficiency. The match ends upon concession, incapacitation, or my judgment. Begin." The word had barely faded before Levi moved. She didn't run. She exploded. One moment she was there, 100 meters away, and the next she was a blue-black blur, covering the distance in a literal heartbeat. She didn't use a spell. It was pure physical reinforcement, mana coursing through her muscles to achieve superhuman speed. She appeared in front of Naruto, her right leg scything for his head in a kick that whistled through the air. The students gasped. No one could react to that speed. Naruto didn't even seem to try. At the last possible microsecond, he dropped, his body falling backward as if his spine had dissolved. The kick passed harmlessly over his face, so close he could feel the wind from it. He planted his hands on the ground and sprung back up, not onto his feet, but into a sweeping kick of his own aimed at her supporting leg. Levi was already moving. She hopped over his sweep, spun in midair, and brought her heel down in an axe kick aimed at his head. Naruto twisted, the blow glancing off his shoulder with a dull thud. He absorbed the momentum, using it to spin away and create a few meters of distance. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. The crowd was dead silent. They had just witnessed a level of close-quarters combat that was beyond anything they had ever seen. It wasn't magic. It was pure, brutal, physical artistry. "Not bad," Levi breathed, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You're fast. Really fast. You're not slow yourself," Naruto replied, rubbing his shoulder. She hit hard. This was the opening salvo, the testing phase. Levi came at him again. This time her hands a blur, striking at his vital points with precise, mana-sharpened chops. It was like fighting a hurricane of pinpoint strikes. Naruto didn't try to block. He flowed, his body moving like water around her attacks. He parried, redirected, and dodged, his movements economical and efficient. He wasn't just reacting. His body seemed to know where her strikes would be before they landed. Years of fighting against the Sharingan had honed his ability to read body language and muscle tension into a predictive science. In the observation box, Lilith watched, her heart in her throat. "She's using her Tama," she whispered. Arin nodded. "Expectatio." She is anticipating his movements, allowing her to strike at his future positions. On the stage, Levi's frustration was growing. Her Tama was giving her flashes of his intent, but he was so fast, his reactions so instinctual, that he would change his movement in the fraction of a second between her perception and her action. It was like trying to catch smoke. "All right, no more games," Levi said, leaping back to create distance. She raised her hand, and a complex blue sigil flared to life. Shamanic spell. 3-point stasis. 3 points of blue light appeared around Naruto, forming a triangle. They shot inward, not as projectiles, but as lines of force, intent on binding him in a magical prison. Naruto's eyes widened. A binding jutsu. He didn't try to dodge. He slammed his hands together in a seal that was both foreign and deeply familiar. Shadow clone jutsu. In 3 puffs of smoke, 3 identical Narutos appeared. One stood his ground, one leapt high into the air, and one dropped to the ground. The binding spell, targeting the original's position, slammed into an empty spot. As he used the smoke as cover for a swift substitution with a small log he'd apparently picked up from the courtyard earlier and stored in a small seal on his wrist. The crowd erupted. 3 more of him. They were perfect copies, not illusions. They moved, breathed, and carried the same overwhelming power signature. "What is that?" a professor in the stands exclaimed. "Multiple, simultaneous creation of sentient golems. The mana cost. ... Levi was staring, her grin back, wider and more dangerous than ever. "Now this is a party." The 3 Narutos didn't hesitate. They fanned out, their movements perfectly coordinated. They were a wolf pack, and Levi was the prey. They attacked as one, a whirlwind of fists and feet from 3 different directions. This was the moment Levi's Tama truly shone. Fighting one opponent whose movements were instinctual was hard. Fighting 3 was a different problem entirely. Her mind was flooded with predictive flashes, a chaotic storm of potential attacks. She couldn't focus on one without being vulnerable to the others. She was forced onto the defensive, her own fluid movements becoming a desperate dance of survival. She blocked a punch from the right, dodged a kick from the left, and parried a jab from behind. It was overwhelming. "This is his strategy," Arin stated from the box, her voice holding a new note of clinical excitement. "He is creating an information overload to neutralize her predictive advantage. Logically, it is the perfect counter." The clones were relentless. They weren't just throwing random attacks. They were boxing her in, limiting her options, forcing her into a corner. Levi grit her teeth. She was being outthought, outmaneuvered. "Fine," she yelled, slamming her palm on the ground. A massive wave of blue magical energy erupted from the floor, forcing all 3 clones to leap back. In that moment of respite, she drew her grimoire, Twilitgingnur, from a pocket dimension. It took the form of 2 wickedly sharp, short swords. "Let's see your clones handle this," she snarled. She became a whirlwind of slicing steel and blue energy. The clones, unarmed, were at a disadvantage. One lunged in, and with a swift, brutal movement, Levi disarmed it, severing its arm at the elbow. The clone flickered and dissolved into smoke. A second clone tried a sweeping kick, but Levi dropped low and thrust upward, impaling it. It too vanished in a puff. Now it was one-on-one again. But Levi knew the original was still out there, watching, waiting. She scanned the arena, her eyes sharp. A flicker of movement behind one of T. He massive pillars supporting the arena roof. "Found you." She shot off like a bullet, swords leading the way. As she rounded the pillar, she saw him, standing with his back to her. An easy target. She lunged, swords aimed for a disabling strike. But as her blades were about to connect, the Naruto in front of her dissolved into smoke. "A substitution. Looking for me." The voice came from above. Levi's eyes shot up. The real Naruto was dropping down from the top of the pillar, his right hand cupped, a swirling, violent sphere of pure crimson mana spinning in his palm. It wasn't the contained, dark energy he'd held in the breakdown. This was his own power, a chaotic, destructive vortex screaming with untamed force. A Rasengan. Levi had no time to dodge. Her instincts, honed by 1,000 battles, screamed at her. She crossed her swords in front of her, pouring every ounce of her mana into a defensive barrier. Expectatio. Final defense. Aegis of stillness. A shield of brilliant, crystal, line blue energy erupted in front of her, just as Naruto's attack struck. The impact was not an explosion. It was a grinding, shrieking cataclysm. The Rasengan wasn't a projectile, it was a drill. It didn't bounce off her shield. It bored into it. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched scream of magic being torn apart. Cracks, like a spiderweb, spread across her aegis. What is that spell? Lilith breathed, her hand gripping the railing. There's no incantation, no rune structure, it's just pure, focused power and rotation. Levi felt the pressure. It was immense, overwhelming. Her shield, it had once stopped a rogue chimera's fire breath cold, was shattering like glass. Her arms trembled, the muscles in her back screaming in protest. She could see Naruto's face through the fracturing light of her shield. His expression was one of absolute, cold focus. The lazy grin was gone. This was the face of a killer. With a final, deafening crack, her aegis of stillness shattered into a million glittering shards of blue light. The force of the Rasengan, its target gone, washed over her. But it wasn't a blast. The sphere of energy was already gone, dismissed by Naruto in the instant her shield broke. What hit her was the concussive force, a hammer blow of air that threw her backward, skidding across the stone stage. She landed hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Her swords clattered to the ground a few feet away. She was disarmed, her ultimate defense broken. She had lost. She pushed herself up on one elbow, gasping for air, and looked up. Naruto was standing over her, not with a triumphant sneer, but with that same intense, analytical expression. In his hand, a blade of pure, golden mana had formed, shaped like the kunai of his past life. He held its point just a centimeter from her throat. Checkmate. The arena was utterly silent. The impossible had happened. Levi Kazama, the invincible ninja, the Trinity 7's master of combat, had been defeated. Naruto held the position for a second, letting the reality of the moment sink in for everyone watching. Then, the golden blade in his hand dissolved into motes of light. He dismissed his fighting stance and extended his free hand down to her. "You're fast," he said, his voice back to its normal, calm tone. "And you hit hard. Your anticipation is a pain in the ass to deal with." Levi stared at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. The killer was gone, replaced by the easy-going boy from the courtyard. She saw no mockery in his eyes, no gloating. Only a simple, honest acknowledgement of her skill. A warrior's respect. She took his hand. A jolt, like static electricity but warmer, passed between them as he effortlessly pulled her to her feet. "You're full of surprises, transfer student," she said, a genuine, breathless smile on her face. The fight had been exhilarating, terrifying, and the most fun she'd had in years. "That spinning ball thing, what was it?" "A personal trick," he said, picking up one of her swords and handing it to her. "Good for breaking through stubborn defenses. You could have obliterated me with it," she stated, her eyes sharp. "Why did you pull back?" "The match was over when your shield broke," he said with a shrug. "The point was to win, not to injure you. What's the sense in hurting a good sparring partner?" The words hit Levi harder than any punch. A good sparring partner. He wasn't seeing her as a defeated opponent, but as a future comrade. In that moment, her professional interest, her need to measure him, coalesced into something else entirely. A deep, profound respect that was quickly tipping into fascination. He was the first person she had ever met who thought about fighting the same way she did. He was one of her own. HMPH, she grunted, trying to regain her composure. But the smile wouldn't leave her face. "Don't get cocky. Next time, I'll be ready for your little clone trick. I'll be counting on it," he said, his own grin returning. As they walked off the stage together, the hushed whispers of the crowd following them, Naruto had won more than a duel. He had forged his first true alliance in this strange new world. Miles away, in the deepest, Most secure sub-level of the academy, Lacey Sherlock, a petite girl with a large camera grimoire, pushed her glasses up her nose. She and Selena, the headmaster's prim and proper research assistant, were hunched over a holographic display showing a slow-motion replay of the duel. "There," Lacey said, pointing a finger at the screen. She zoomed in on the moment Naruto formed the Rasengan. The swirling crimson energy was a maelstrom. But inside it, captured by her grimoire's high-fidelity sensors, were unmistakable flecks of brilliant gold. "The same signature as the entrance exam," Selena murmured. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She brought up another window showing the spectral analysis. The crimson energy spiked violently on the charts, registering as pure, chaotic superbia magic. But threaded through it was the golden energy, a calm, steady sine wave that was the polar opposite. "I've cross-referenced the golden signature with every known archive in the Biblia library," Selena said, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "It has trace similarities to the highest echelons of Fides, faith or holy magic, but it's not a match. The energy is too fundamental, too vital. It's like his magic is at war with itself," Lacey observed. "The crimson part is a classic demon lord signature, pure, selfish destruction. But the golden part, look." She isolated the moment Naruto formed the kunai at Levi's throat. The energy for the clone was gold. The energy for the Rasengan was crimson. But the energy for this blade is gold again. It's creative, stable, and precise. He uses the Cr. Imson for overwhelming force and the gold for finesse and creation. Selena leaned back, a look of profound unease on her face. "He's a walking paradox, a demon lord candidate with an affinity for superbia, but also wielding a power that acts like Vita, the lost archive of life. It's a contradiction. A demon lord's power is supposed to reject life, to consume it. But his seems to be fused with it." The implications were staggering. It meant that Naruto wasn't just a powerful magus. He was an existential anomaly. An impossibility made flesh. "The headmaster's fears were justified," Selena said, her voice barely a whisper. "If the other magical authorities, like the Royal Liber Academy or the Ishkarioth, were to discover this, they would see him not as a candidate to be taught, but as a heresy to be purged." The two women looked at each other, the weight of their discovery settling upon them. The secret of Naruto Uzumaki's power was a bomb, and they were the only two who knew just how short the fuse was. The internal suspicion at the academy had just graduated to a certainty. Their new student was the most dangerous and promising individual to appear in centuries, and his very existe. NCE threatened to shatter the fragile peace of their world. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Silent Partner and the Echoes of Ruin. The victory over Levi had bought Naruto a measure of respect, replacing the overt fear in the student body with a simmering, cautious awe. But it had also painted a larger target on his back. He was no longer just an anomaly. He was a powerhouse, a disruptive force that He Academy's leadership had to take seriously. The headmaster, acting on the subtle but urgent reports from Selena and Lacey, accelerated Naruto's integration. He couldn't be allowed to remain an unknown quantity. He needed to be tested in the field. The opportunity came 3 days later. A magical alert klaxon, a low, mournful chime, echoed through the academy halls. A high-level breakdown phenom. Enon was forming over a sparsely populated island chain several hundred kilometers away. What made it a priority was its speed of development and the bizarre energy readings it was emitting. It wasn't the slow, cancerous growth they were used to. This was an aggressive, targeted expansion. Lilith found Naruto in the library, not buried in a grimoire of magical theory, but studying a world map. He was tracing coastlines and political borders with a focused intensity, absorbing the geography of his new home. "Pack your gear," she said, her tone all business. "We have a mission." He looked up, his expression calm. "Breakdown." She nodded. "Keter class and escalating. The headmaster has assigned a primary response team. You, me, and Arin." Naruto's eyebrows rose slightly. Arin Kanazuki. The silent, doll-like girl. The one whose gaze had felt like being placed under a microscope. He knew her designation. A member of the Trinity 7 and, by some strange, preordained tradition, the designated, Demon Lord's partner. A title that felt both intimate and unnervingly impersonal. "Her?" he asked. "The one who stares." Arin is the world's foremost expert on the Logos arts and a master of ruinous magic. Lilith replied defensively. Her analytical skills are unparalleled. And, she added, a touch of reluctance in her voice, she is technically your partner. It's logical for her to be on this mission. Logical, Naruto repeated, the word tasting like ash. Right. They met Arin at the Academy's main teleportation gate. She stood perfectly still, dressed in a practical combat variant of her uniform. Her expression as placid and unreadable as ever. She held her grimoire, the Book of Ie Saphira, clutched in one hand. Her violet eyes flickered to Naruto, and for a moment, he felt that intense, dissecting gaze again. Uzumaki Naruto, she stated, her voice a soft, even monotone. Your performance against Specialist Kazama was 9.3% more efficient than my initial projections. Your use of autonomous constructs to create an information overload was a strategically sound, if mana inefficient, tactic. Naruto blinked. Thanks. I think it is not a compliment. It is a revised data point, she said, without a hint of irony. Lilith sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Can we just go? The transport spell deposited them on a beach of volcanic black sand. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of salt and decay. In the distance, the sky was the same sickly, bruised purple Naruto recognized from his own arrival. A massive, swirling vortex of black and violet energy dominated the horizon, centered over the largest island in the chain. But something was wrong. This wasn't the slow, chaotic entropy he had experienced before. The edges of the phenomenon were sharp, defined, and littered with strange, crystalline structures that jutted from the landscape like broken bones. They pulsed with a faint, silvery light and looked disturbingly like massive, petrified feathers. This is not a standard breakdown, Lilith murmured, her hand resting on her grimoire. The magical density is off the charts, but it feels structured. The energy composition is paradoxical, Arin added, her eyes scanning the vortex. High concentrations of destructive anti-mana, but also trace elements of a coherent, ordered signature. It is a directed phenomenon. Directed? Naruto asked, his gaze fixed on the feather-like crystals. He'd seen something like them before, a long, long time ago. In the final battle, fleetingly, a technique from a rabbit goddess. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. You mean someone is doing this on purpose? Before they could theorize further, the ground erupted. Misshapen monsters, vaguely humanoid but with too many limbs and faces contorted in silent screams, clawed their way out of the sand. They were not the usual mindless beasts of a breakdown. They moved with a purpose, a coordinated swarm intent on overwhelming the intruders. Hostiles confirmed, Arin stated, her tone unchanging. She opened her grimoire, and runes of destructive power blazed to life around her. Lilith was already in motion, her own grimoire glowing crimson. Outer cocytus, she chanted, and a wave of absolute zero energy washed over the first wave of monsters, freezing them into brittle statues. Arin followed up, Arch Symphony. Meltdown, a beam of pure entropic energy. A focused ray of annihilation, lanced out from her grimoire and struck the frozen horde. They didn't shatter. They simply ceased to exist, erased from reality with a faint sizzle. It was a devastatingly effective combination. A 1-2 punch of absolute cold and absolute destruction. But more monsters were coming, pouring from the corrupted jungle at the edge of the beach. Naruto didn't move. He stood between the two women, his eyes closed, his senses extended. The monsters were a distraction. A symptom. He was focused on the cause. He could feel it now, a cold, leer note hidden beneath the cacophony of the breakdown. A will, a calm, sorrowful, and utterly relentless intent. There are too many, Lilith grunted, blasting another group with a burst of arcane energy. We need to fall back and request reinforcements. Negative, Arin stated, her own spells incinerating another wave. Retreat would allow the phenomenon to expand unchecked. The logical course of action is to neutralize the core. We don't even know where the core is. It's that way, Naruto said, his voice cutting through their argument. He pointed toward the heart of the corrupted jungle. There's a single, focused point of control. Everything else is just noise. Lilith and Arin stared at him. Their advanced magical sensors could barely get a coherent reading through the interference. How could he pinpoint the source so easily? How can you be sure? Lilith demanded. I can feel it, he said, his eyes still closed. It feels lonely. He opened his eyes, their blue depths hard as diamonds. Stay here. Keep them busy. I'll handle the core. Before either of them could protest, he was gone. He didn't use a spell. He just moved, a blur of orange and black that shot off the beach and into the twisted crystalline jungle. Idiot, Lilith swore, blasting a monster that got too close. His actions are illogical, Arin said, though her gaze followed the path he'd taken with an unreadable intensity. A frontal assault on an unknown enemy without support is tactical suicide. Then why? Lilith shot back, unleashing a torrent of fire. Does it feel like he's the only one who knows what he's doing? Naruto moved through the corrupted jungle like a phantom. The trees were twisted into unnatural shapes, their leaves replaced by the same silvery, feather-like crystals. The air was thick with a cloying sweetness. The smell of rot masked by something trying to be perfume. He ignored the lesser monsters that lunged from the shadows, his movements a fluid dance of evasion. They were irrelevant. He followed the thread of intent, the cold, sorrowful note that resonated in his soul. It grew stronger, clearer, and with it, a feeling of deep, profound grief. Not the chaotic rage of a beast, but the directed sorrow of a sentient mind. He broke through the trees into a clearing. In the center, the source of the breakdown was not what he expected. It wasn't some pulsating magical engine or a hulking beast. It was a person, a man, dressed in the simple robes of a local islander, lay on the ground, his chest pierced by a spear of pure, white light. He was still breathing, barely. Around him, the world was dissolving, consumed by the vortex of power erupting from his wound. Naruto skidded to a halt. This wasn't the source. This was the fuel. Please, the man gasped, his eyes wide with terror and pain. He looked at Naruto, but seemed to be seeing something else. Mercy. The angel promised us salvation, a merciful judgment. Angel. Naruto knelt beside him, his mind racing. He came from the sky, the man whispered, a bloody froth on his lips. He said our world was sick, that our magic was a plague. He offered a cure, a gentle end. He coughed, his body seizing. He lied. The man's eyes went vacant. The life faded from him, and as it did, the breakdown phenomenon shuddered, the vortex of power faltering for a moment before surging with renewed, undirected fury. The will that had been guiding it was gone, leaving only a chaotic, mindless storm. Naruto stood up, his fists clenched. An angel, who promised salvation and delivered a spear of light. A power that purged magic. It was a new enemy. One who used language of piety to mask their cruelty. It was a level of hypocrisy he hadn't encountered since the corrupted elders of his own village. But he had a more immediate problem. Without the man's dying consciousness to focus it, the breakdown was about to collapse catastrophically, taking the entire island chain with it. He needed to find the true core. The spear of light, his senses, no longer distracted by the man's intent, latched onto it. The spear was not just a weapon, it was an anchor, a conduit pouring anti-magic into this world. He reached out and grabbed its shaft. Pain, a white-hot, searing agony unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't physical, it was existential. The spear's energy wasn't just destroying his magic, it was trying to unmake his very soul. His crimson demon lord energy recoiled, sputtering and dying against the holy purity of the spear's power. This was a weapon designed specifically to kill beings like him. He roared, his own power flaring in defiance. Not the crimson, the gold. He poured his life force, his Vita energy, into his hands. The spear of holy light, a weapon of absolute purification, was suddenly faced with its antithesis, a torrent of pure, unadulterated life. The two forces clashed. White light and golden light erupted in a blinding torrent, the clearing becoming the epicenter of a war between two fundamental cosmic principles. The spear shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of reality. It was trying to purge his life force, but his was the energy of creation, of existence itself. It was like trying to use a fire hose to put out the ocean. He wrapped both hands around the spear and pulled. His muscles screamed. His very soul felt like it was being flayed, but his will was absolute. With a final, guttural yell, he ripped the spear from the ground. The moment it was free, the breakdown phenomenon collapsed. The swirling vortex winked out of existence. The sickly purple sky vanished, replaced by the normal blue of the afternoon. The crystalline structures shattered into dust. The world snapped back to its proper form. Naruto stood panting in the silent jungle, the spear of light held tight in his hand. It was still humming with a malevolent energy, but cut off from its source, it was weakening. He could feel it fighting him, but it was a losing battle. He had won. It was then that Lilith and Arin burst into the clearing, their faces flushed from battle. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene, the dead islander, the peaceful jungle, and Naruto, standing there holding a weapon that radiated an aura of pure, terrifying holiness. Naruto. What happened? Lilith gasped. The breakdown just stopped. He didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the spear, his expression dark. We have a new enemy, he said, his voice low and dangerous. One that calls itself an angel. Back at the academy, the spear of light was the center of a storm of controversy. It was housed in the deepest, most secure magical containment vault, a chamber shielded by dozens of layers of warding spells. Even so, a faint, oppressive aura of purity and judgment leaked out, making the skin of any magus who came near it crawl. The headmaster, Lilith, Arin, and Naruto stood in an observation room, looking at the spear through a thick, shielded window. The energy signature is confirmed, the headmaster said, his voice grim. It is a form of holy magic, but of a kind we have never encountered. It is designed for one purpose, the complete and utter annihilation of demonic and arcane energies. It doesn't just dispel magic, it purges it from existence. The victim called his attacker an angel, Naruto said, his arms crossed. He promised salvation and delivered this. The chains of Samael, the headmaster whispered, his expression bleak. An old, apocryphal legend. A celestial order from another world, dedicated to pruning realities they deem to be infected by demonic influence to prevent a multiversal collapse. We believed them to be a myth, a scary story told to acolytes. They are real, Lilith stated, her face pale. And they are targeting demon lord candidates. Her eyes, and the headmaster's, turned to Naruto. He was the prime target, the strongest candidate to appear in centuries. Naruto's expression remained unchanged. He was focused on Arin, who had been silent throughout the entire debriefing. She hadn't looked at the spear once. She was staring at him. What is it, Arin? He asked, his voice cutting through the tension. She finally blinked, her violet eyes focusing on him with an unnerving intensity. On the island, she began, her voice a soft monotone. Professor Asami and I were engaging 178 hostile entities. Our combined forts were neutralizing them at a rate of 1.2 entities per second. Projections indicated we would have been overwhelmed in approximately 7 minutes. It was an illogical tactical situation. Get to the point, Naruto said, his patience wearing thin. You instructed us to remain and engage a numerically superior force while you pursued an unknown objective alone, she continued. This is a violation of standard tactical doctrine. The logical choice would have been for all three of us to retreat or advance together. And what's your point? Her gaze flickered down to his hands, which were clenched at his sides, then back to his eyes. My point is that I followed your instructions. Professor Asami followed your instructions. We did not question them. We did not hesitate. For a magus of my disposition, acting on an illogical command without question is an anomaly. She took a small, hesitant step closer to him. The air in the room felt charged. My purpose is to be the demon lord's partner, she said. Her voice still quiet but now laced with a thread of something new. Confusion. My role is to observe, to analyze, to provide logical counsel, and if necessary, to be a final countermeasure. But on that island, I did not feel like a countermeasure. Or an observer. She paused, and for the first time, Naruto saw a flicker of genuine emotion in her doll-like eyes, a deep, profound curiosity. When you gave that command, it did not feel illogical. It felt correct. Your will superseded my logic. Naruto stared at her. He had expected fear, or suspicion, or even anger at his recklessness. He had not expected this. This quiet, analytical confession. She wasn't just analyzing the battle, she was analyzing her own reaction to him. He thought back to the clearing, to the moment he had decided to destroy the core. It hadn't been a choice born of logic. It had been an act of pure, gut instinct. A ruthless, necessary decision to prevent a greater catastrophe. He had seen the illusion on of an innocent powering a collapse before, a trap designed to make a hero hesitate. He hadn't hesitated. He had seen through the deception and acted. He realized now that he hadn't just told them what he was going to do. He had expected them to obey. And they had. Your Tama is Emperor, Arin whispered, the words hanging in the air between them. To command. It appears its influence is not limited to mana alone. She was right. His will, the very essence of his Tama, was beginning to affect not just energy, but people. It wasn't mind control. It was a form of absolute, unshakable conviction. On that inspired, or compelled, others to follow. It was the natural charisma of a leader, amplified to a supernatural degree. Lilith watched the exchange, a complex expression on her face. She too had obeyed without question. On the beach, his command had cut through her panic and doubt, leaving only a clear sense of purpose. He had told them to hold the line, and she had done so as if it were the only conceivable option in the universe. She had chalked it up to battlefield necessity, but now, hearing Arin's analysis, she understood it was something deeper. Naruto didn't know what to say. He looked at Arin, this strange, logical girl who was now looking at him as if he were the most fascinating puzzle in the world. He hadn't asked for a partner. He certainly hadn't asked for one who was preordained by tradition. He had wanted to forge his own connections, his own bonds. He reached out, not with his power, but with a simple, human gesture. He gently took the grimoire from her unresisting hands. She looked startled, her placid expression finally breaking. Arin, he said, his voice softer now. Forget about being the Demon Lord's partner. Forget about your role. You're a person. You're a powerful magus who can erase things from existence. That's a hell of a lot more interesting. He handed the book back to her. Next time, don't just analyze what I'm doing. Tell me if you think there's a better way. I don't need an observer. I need a partner I can count on. He wasn't talking about the traditional role anymore. He was talking to her. He was dismissing her preordained purpose and asking for her personal will. Arin stared at the grimoire in her hands, then back at his face. Her logical mind, which processed the world in equations and data points, was failing. It couldn't quantify the warmth spreading through her chest. It couldn't explain why his words felt more significant than any law of magic she had ever studied. For the first time in her life, Arin Kanazuki W. as faced with a variable she had no desire to solve, only to experience. Her stoic facade didn't just crack, it began to melt. A new kind of bond had just been forged. Not in the heat of combat like with Levi, but in the quiet aftermath of a shared crisis. A connection built on a challenge to her very identity, and an invitation to become something more. The silent partner had just found her voice, even if she didn't yet know how to use it. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Uncrowned Court and the Teacher's Gambit. The incident with the angel and the spear of light sent ripples of panic through the hidden echelons of the magical world. The headmaster of Royal Biblia had discreetly shared his findings with the leaders of other major magical academies, and the news that the chains of Samael W'er. Not a myth sent a chill through them all. Their response, however, was not one of unity. It was one of fear. And fear sought a target. The whispers about Naruto Uzumaki, which had been confined to the students of Biblia, now spread like wildfire through the global magical network. He was the anomaly who had appeared at the epicenter of a breakdown. He was the powerhouse who had defeated one of the Trinity 7 in a duel. And now, he was the magus who had survived a direct encounter with a weapon of the Celestial Order. The narrative began to twist. He wasn't just a powerful candidate, he was a magnet for disaster. His very existence was attracting this new, terrifying threat. The pressure on the headmaster became immense. Factions within the Global Council of Magi, particularly the Stau NCH traditionalists from the Royal Liber Academy, began to demand action. They saw Naruto not as a potential savior, but as a singularity of chaos, a demon lord candidate with an unprecedented and tickle fusion of powers who was now drawing the attention of an enemy capable of purging magic itself. Their solution was simple and brutal: contain the threat. The headmaster fought back, arguing that Naruto was their best hope. A potential weapon against the chains of Samael. But fear was a more potent argument than hope. A compromise was reached, one that felt more like a condemnation. They would hold an official inquisition at Royal Biblia. A council of senior magi from various institutions would convene to assess Naruto Uzumaki and, as was their ancient right, place powerful magical seals upon him to limit his power, for the good of the world. It was a political maneuver dressed up as a safety precaution. A public neutering. Naruto felt the shift immediately. The awe from the students curdled back into fear and suspicion. Professors who had been cautiously friendly now avoided his gaze. He was once again an outcast, isolated by a power he hadn't asked for and a reputation he hadn't built. Levi was furious, her loyalty to him making her a pariah by association. She offered to have a chat with some of the more vocal critics, an offer that involved her fists and a complete disregard for school rules. But Naruto calmly told her to stand down. This wasn't a fight that could be won with a duel. Arin, in her own way, was just as supportive. She spent hours in the library, her motionless facade a perfect shield as she dug through ancient texts, searching for legal precedents and magical loopholes to counter the Inquisition's authority. She would present her findings to Naruto on neat, handwritten notes. Logical arguments against his containment. It was her way of fighting, and he appreciated it more than she knew. Lilith was caught in the middle. As a professor and a member of the Trinity 7, she was expected to uphold the Academy's position. But as his assigned teacher, and as the woman who had stood beside him on that corrupted island, she was torn. She saw the injustice, the fear-driven politics that were about to sacrifice a boy who had done nothing but survive and protect. The day of the Inquisition arrived, gray and overcast, the mood of the sky matching the grim atmosphere in the Academy. The hearing was held in the Grand Sanctum, a cavernous, circular chamber usually reserved for the most sacred rites. The vaulted ceiling was so high it was lost in shadow, and the walls were lined with silent, armored golems, their presence a clear display of authority. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood Naruto. He wore his usual jacket, a splash of defiant orange and black in a room filled with the somber robes of the Magi. He was alone, unarmed, his hands in his pockets. He looked not like a prisoner, but like a man waiting for a late train. The tiered benches surrounding the platform were filled with the most powerful Magi in the world. Stern-faced men and women from Liber, mystical delegates from Ishkarioth, and a council of Biblia's own senior professors, including a visibly conflicted headmaster. Lilith sat among them, her face a mask of neutrality, but her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. Levi and Arin were forced to watch from a public gallery high above, their presence tolerated but their voices silenced. The chief inquisitor, a tall, gaunt man from the Liber Academy named Lord Valerius, stood to begin the proceedings. His voice was cold and resonant, filling the sanctum with an air of absolute authority. Naruto Uzumaki, Valerius began, his eyes like chips of ice. You stand before this council accused of being a clear and present danger to the magical world. Your unprecedented power, your heretical fusion of magical archives, and your role as a catalyst for extra diamonds. Ional threats have made you an unacceptable risk. We are here not to judge your intent, but to mitigate your effect. He didn't ask for a defense. He didn't ask for an explanation. It was a sentencing from the very beginning. The council proposes the immediate application of the Seal of Solomon, Valerius declared. A series of 9 magical restraints that will bind your power, limiting your Magi Cal output to a level deemed safe by this body. Do you have any final words before we proceed? A ripple of murmurs went through the council. The Seal of Solomon was a relic of a darker age, a magical brand used to cripple archdemons. It didn't just limit power, it shattered a Magus' connection to their own soul. It was a living death. From the gallery, Levi shot to her feet, a snarl on her face. You can't be serious. You're going to cripple him out of fear. 2 armored golems immediately moved to flank her, their glowing eyes a silent warning. Arin placed a calming hand on Levi's arm. Levi, not now. This is not the venue. Her voice was low, but firm. Down on the platform, Naruto hadn't moved. He slowly pulled his hands from his pockets and looked around the room, his gaze passing over each member of the council. He didn't look angry. He didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. You're all so powerful, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. You can teleport across the world, freeze time, erase things from existence. You hold the laws of reality in your hands. He paused, his gaze finally settling on Lord Valerius. And with all that power, the best you can come up with is fear. You're afraid of what you don't understand, so you want to chain it. You're afraid of an enemy you can't fight, so you want to sacrifice the one person who can. He took a step forward, his presence seeming to grow, to fill the room. The air grew heavy, thick with his untamed power. He wasn't even flaring his mana. It was the sheer force of his will, his emperor, pressing down on them. You talk about my effect, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. Let's talk about my effect. My effect was stabilizing a breakdown that should have erased a city. My effect was defeating a member of your precious Trinity 7 and earning her respect. My effect was tearing the heart out of a phenomenon created by your new angelic enemies while the rest of you were still debating what it was. He pointed a finger at Valerius. My power isn't the problem here. Your weakness is your fear. You want to put chains on me. Go ahead and try. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. A challenge. But know this. The moment you do, you lose the only person who is willing to stand between you and the angels at your door. You think they'll stop with me. They called your magic a plague. You're next. A stunned silence fell over the sanctum. No one had ever spoken to the council with such open contempt. Valerius's face was purple with rage. Insolence. He spat. Your arrogance alone is proof of your demonic nature. You have sealed your own fate. All in favor of applying the seal of Solomon, signify now. Hands began to go up around the chamber. The traditionalists from Liber, the cautious delegates from other schools, even some of the more conservative professors from Biblia. The headmaster kept his hands down, his face a mask of misery. But he was in the minority. Fear had won. In the gallery, Levi drew her swords. Like hell you are. The golems moved to intercept her. Arin closed her eyes. Logical outcome. Disastrous. But before Valerius could bring down his gavel and make the verdict final, a clear, ringing voice cut through the tension. I am not in favor. Every head turned. Lilith Asami was on her feet. Her face was no longer a neutral mask. It was a portrait of cold, furious resolve. She stared directly at Lord Valerius, her crimson eyes blazing. Professor Asami, Valerius said, his voice dripping with condescension. Your sentiment is noted, but the vote is clear. The vote is irrelevant, Lilith said, her voice echoing with a power they had not heard from her before. She took a step forward, into the aisle. You seek to chain my student based on fear and speculation. You speak of ancient laws and traditions. Very well, let us speak of them. She raised her right hand, and her grimoire, Hermes Apocrypha, materialized in a flash of crimson light. It floated before her, its pages flipping rapidly. I invoke the right of Aegis, she declared, her voice resonating with magical power. The entire sanctum seemed to hum in response. A wave of shock passed through the council. Even the headmaster's eyes went wide. The right of Aegis, one of the professors whispered in horror. That hasn't been invoked in 500 years. It's academic suicide. Valerius was, for the first time, speechless. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious in my life, Lilith said, her gaze unwavering. She looked past the sputtering inquisitor, her eyes finding Naruto's on the platform. In that look, he saw everything. Her frustration, her anger, and beneath it all, an absolute, unshakable faith in him. I, Lilith Asami, professor of the Royal Biblia Academy and member of the Trinity 7, she announced, her voice a binding oath, do hereby stake my life, my title, and my own magi. See on the character and actions of my student, Naruto Uzumaki. I declare myself his aegis, his shield and guarantor. From this moment forward, his crimes are my crimes. His failures are my failures. And why punishment to be meted out upon him must first pass through me. A complex, glowing crimson rune, the symbol of the Aegis, blazed to life on the back of her hand, searing itself into her skin. She didn't even flinch. If you wish to place your chains upon him, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, you will have to defeat me in a sanctioned duel of forfeiture first. And I promise you, Lord Valerius, she added, her eyes narrowing into slits, I will not make it easy for you. The sanctum was thrown into chaos. The rite of Aegis was the ultimate gambit. It was a teacher's final, most extreme act of faith in a student. By invoking it, Lilith had chained her fate to Naruto's. She had turned a political execution into a personal challenge, wrapping him in her own authority and reputation. To proceed, the council would have to formally challenge and defeat one of the world's most powerful magi, an act that would shatter the fragile alliance of the academies. Valerius stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had been completely outmaneuvered. His political masterstroke had been countered by a deeply personal sacrifice he could never have anticipated. He looked at Lilith's blazing eyes, felt the raw power radiating from her, and knew he would not win that duel. More importantly, he knew he couldn't risk the political fallout of even trying. He slammed his gavel down in pure, impotent fury. This inquisition is suspended. He snarled, and stormed out of the sanctum, his followers trailing in his wake. The tension in the room broke. The remaining magi began to talk at once, their voices a buzz of disbelief and shock. The headmaster sagged in his seat, a look of profound relief on his face. In the gallery, Levi slowly lowered her swords, a look of stunned admiration on her face. Holy shit, she breathed. The teacher's got guts. Arin was watching Lilith, a new data stream of information processing in her mind. An act of extreme emotional investment, she murmured to herself. Not logically sound for self-preservation, but strategically brilliant, and emotionally significant. On the platform, Naruto stood motionless, watching Lilith. The anger had faded from his eyes, replaced by a deep, powerful emotion he hadn't felt in a very long time. In his old life, people had believed in him, eventually. But it was a belief he had been forced to earn through years of struggle. Through acts of heroism and sacrifice. No one had ever, from the very beginning, simply stood up and staked their entire existence on him. On his potential, on his character. He had seen her as his teacher. A powerful, knowledgeable, if sometimes frustrating, guide. But in that moment, as she stood defiant against the most powerful people in their world, all for him, she became something more. She was no longer just Professor Asami. She was Lilith, his partner, his shield. He walked down from the platform, ignoring the stares and whispers, and stopped in front of her. The crimson Aegis rune on her hand was still glowing faintly. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the edge of the mark. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice soft. Yes, she replied, her voice equally quiet, the fire in her eyes softening as she looked at him. I did. Their relationship had been forged in the strange space between teacher and student, a bond of mutual curiosity and respect. But with this one act, this monumental gamble, Lilith had shattered that framework entirely. It was a political masterstroke, yes, but it was also a deeply personal confession. A declaration of faith that went far beyond any professional duty. It was the moment their connection deepened from one of respect to a profound, unspoken bond of absolute loyalty. He saw the lonely, burdened woman who had carried the weight of her power alone for so long. And she saw the young man with ancient eyes who was worthy of her trust, a leader who could bear the burdens she could no longer carry by herself. As they stood there in the echoing sanctum, a silent understanding passed between them. A new foundation had been laid. Unseen, high in the shadowy arches of the sanctum's ceiling, a single, pure white feather drifted down, landing softly on the armrest of the now empty Inquisitor's throne. It was perfect, crystalline, and pulsed with a faint, cold light before dissolving into nothing. A cloaked figure, hidden by shadow-weaving magic that made him invisible to all but the most perceptive senses, watched the scene below. He was a scout for the chains of Samael. His orders had been to observe, to confirm the nature of the anomaly. What he had just witnessed was more than he could have hoped for. The anomaly was not just powerful. He was charismatic. He inspired loyalty, sacrifice. He was building his court. The Crimson Magus, the Shadow Warrior, the Silent Logician. The pattern was undeniable. The corruption spreads, the scout whispered into a small communication device. He relayed what he had seen. The failed Inquisition, the rite of Aegis, the formation of a loyal inner circle around the Demon Lord candidate. He is consolidating his power. He is winning their hearts. The first seal is broken. The scout then dissolved into the shadows, leaving no trace of his presence except for the chilling implication of his words. The enemy was no longer just observing. They were here, in the heart of the academy. And they were judging. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Angel of Judgment and the Roar of the Beast. Lilith's gambit had won them a reprieve, but it had also drawn a line in the sand. The Royal Biblia Academy was now Naruto's sanctuary and his fortress, and the other magical factions watched with a mixture of resentment and fear. The internal politics of their world were fractured, leaving them vulnerable. It was the exact moment the chains of Samael chose to strike. It began not with a thunderclap, but with a song. A faint, ethereal choir music drifted down from the heavens. A melody of impossible beauty and profound sorrow. Students and professors alike spilled out into the courtyards, looking up at the sky. The twin moons were still visible, but they were being eclipsed by a new, terrible light. A gateway of pure, blinding white energy had torn open in the fabric of the sky above the floating academy. From it descended angels. They were not the benevolent, feathered beings of myth. They were terrifyingly beautiful, clad in gleaming white and gold armor that seemed forged from solidified light. Their faces were serene, impassive masks of divine judgment, and their wings were not feathers, but blades of razor-sharp energy. They numbered in the hundreds, an angelic host that blotted out the stars. At their head, one figure descended, with a grace that belied his immense power. He was taller than the others, his armor more ornate, etched with golden runes that wept light. He had no helmet, revealing a face of heartbreaking beauty, and eyes that held the sadness of a dying star. This was Azrael, the Angel of Judgment. Citizens of the Royal Biblia Academy, his voice boomed, not with anger, but with a deep, resonant sorrow that echoed in every soul. It was a voice that promised peace, but the peace of the grave. You have harbored a cosmic blight, a paradoxical existence whose very nature unravels the laws of creation. A demon lord with the power of a god. His gaze, heavy with the weight of galaxies, swept over the academy until it found Naruto, who was standing on the main quadrangle, flanked by Lilith, Levi, and Arin. Surrender the anomaly, Naruto Uzumaki. Azrael declared, his voice softening to a tone of pity. Allow us to perform our sacred, painful duty of purgation. This is your only warning. His existence is a sin that cannot be forgiven. Do not make his sin your own. You have 5 minutes. The headmaster appeared on a balcony overlooking the quad, his face grim. All faculty, to defensive positions. Trinity 7, engage the primary threat. Protect the students. The academy roared to life. Wards of shimmering gold and blue light flared up around the island, a dome of protective energy. The armor, golems lining the halls marched out into the open, their crystal eyes glowing with combat intent. Professors unleashed spells, weaving complex patterns of energy to reinforce the main shield. Levi was already moving, her combat blades, Twilitgingnur, in her hands. He's all yours, Naruto. I'll take care of the welcoming committee. She shot off like a bullet towards the descending angels, a blue streak of defiance. Arin opened her grimoire. Probability of successful defense against a force of this magnitude, 1.7%. However, the variable of Naruto Uzumaki's full potential is unquantified. She looked at him, her violet eyes holding a sliver of something that looked almost like faith. Prove my calculations wrong. She began chanting, and pillars of destructive magic erupted from the ground, aimed at Azrael's lieutenants. Lilith stood her ground next to Naruto, her own grimoire glowing with furious crimson light. The Aegis rune on her hand burned brightly. My life is staked on yours, remember. I'm not going anywhere. Naruto watched the angels descend. He felt their power, cold, pure, and utterly antithetical to his own. He looked at Levi, a lone warrior charging an army. He looked at Arin, calmly unleashing spells that could level mountains. He looked at Lilith, ready to die for him. They were fighting for him, for their home. And this angel was threatening to burn it all down to get to him. The cold, controlled man who had analyzed his way through every crisis was gone. In his place, something ancient and primal began to stir. The trauma of his past, of seeing his friends fall, of a world ravaged by war, of failing to save the one person he cared about most, welled up, not as fear, but as a white-hot, focused rage. I won't let you take anything else from me, he whispered. Azrael's 5 minutes were up. With a gesture of serene finality, he pointed a single finger at the Academy's main dome shield. A beam of pure white light, no thicker than a thread, shot from his fingertip. It struck the shield, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, cracks of brilliant light spread across the entire dome. With a sound like shattering glass on a cosmic scale, the Combin. Ed magical defenses of the Royal Biblia Academy, the work of hundreds of the world's most powerful magi, disintegrated into nothing. Impossible, the headmaster breathed. He nullified it. The angelic host descended, their energy blades clashing against the Academy's defenders. Levi was a whirlwind of blue and black, her blades a blur as she met 2 of Azrael's lieutenants. She was impossibly fast, her Tama allowing her to anticipate their every move, but their holy power was like acid, sizzling and corroding her own mana with every blocked strike. She was holding them off, but she was on a timer. Arin's spells of ruination, which could unmake matter itself, struck the angels and dissipated with a harmless fizzle. Their holy armor seemed to exist outside the laws of her magic. She was forced to switch tactics, using her magic to manipulate the environment, raising walls of stone and earth to slow their advance, but it was a desperate, losing battle. Azrael ignored the chaos below. His sorrowful eyes were fixed only on Naruto. He descended, landing softly on the quadrangle 100 feet away. The grass at his feet didn't even bend. "It is time," Azrael said, his voice gentle. The headmaster teleported in front of him. His own grimoire open, ancient and powerful runes swirling around him. "You will not touch my student." He unleashed his ultimate spell, a torrent of pure magi. Cal energy that had once sealed a rogue dragon. Azrael didn't even flinch. He raised a hand, and the spell, a river of raw power, split around him as if he were a stone in a stream. He took 1 step forward and gently placed his palm on the headmaster's chest. "Your conviction is admirable, but it is misplaced." A flash of white light, and the headmaster was thrown backward, his magical energy completely and violently severed. He crashed to the ground, unconscious and powerless, his grimoire clattering beside him. Lilith screamed in fury, chrono-rending. She unleashed her ultimate time magic, a wave of crimson energy designed to age its target to dust in seconds. The spell washed over Azrael, and for a moment, it seemed to work. The edges of his armor began to corrode, to flake away. But then he smiled, a smile of infinite sadness. Time has no dominion over the agents of judgment. The corrosion reversed itself, his armor becoming pristine once more. He flicked his wrist, and a chain of golden light shot out, wrapping around Lilith and hoisting her into the air, helpless. "Lilith!" Naruto roared. "You see," Azrael said, his gaze finally locking with Naruto's. He began to walk forward, his steps slow and deliberate. "This is the chaos you bring. You inspire sacrifice. You foster attachment. You create bonds that will be broken. Your very existence is a catalyst for suffering. You are a monster who wears the mask of a hero, and you force others to die for your lie." Each word was a hammer blow to Naruto's soul. Monster. Lie. Forcing others to die for you. It was every fear, every insecurity he had ever had. The ghost of Sasuke, of Neji, of his master Jiraiya, flashed before his eyes. He saw their faces, twisted in pain, accusing him. "You speak of protecting them," Azrael continued, his voice resonating with righteous conviction as he pinned Naruto in place with the sheer force of his divine pressure. "But a demon lord's nature is to destroy. It is an inevitability. I have seen it. I watched my own world burn, consumed by a demon lord who, like you, believed he was a savior. I will not allow that tragedy to repeat." He stood over Naruto now, his shadow falling over him. He reached down, his hand glowing with the same white, purging light that had felled the headmaster. "Do not fight it. Accept your judgment. In non-existence, you will finally find peace." This was it, the moment of his unmaking. He could feel the holy energy pressing in, beginning to dissolve his power, his very being. The Crimson Demon Lord energy within him shrieked and recoiled, helpless against this absolute counter. But beneath the crimson, beneath the fear and the trauma, the golden ocean began to churn. The sage energy, the life force, the Vita, it did not recoil, it did not fear. The divine power of Azrael was the power of order, of judgment, of an end. But the golden energy within Naruto was the power of life, of will, of a beginning. It was an equal and opposite force. A monster. A voice echoed in his mind. It was his own voice, but deeper, older. Maybe. A catalyst for suffering. The faces of his friends flashed again, but this time they were smiling. Iruka, Kakashi, Sakura, Hinata, Levi, Arin, Lilith. No. The cold, perfect fury he had been suppressing finally broke its chains. He wasn't just angry at Azrael. He was angry at the universe, at fate, at a system T. Hat would brand him a monster for simply trying to protect what he loved. "You're wrong," Naruto whispered, his voice a low growl. Azrael paused, his hand inches from Naruto's forehead. "What did you say?" Naruto's head snapped up, and his eyes were no longer blue. They were a brilliant, molten gold, with the horizontal slit pupils of a sage. The whisker marks on his cheeks thickened, became stark and black. A torrent of power erupted from him, not crimson, but a blinding, pure gold that threw Azrael back a step. "I said you're wrong," he roared, and the sound was not just a sound. It was a shockwave of pure life force. The grass around him grew thick and vibrant. The chain holding Lilith shattered into dust, and she dropped to the ground, gasping. Levi and Arin, faltering in their own battles, felt a wave of vitality wash over them, their energy restored, their wounds knitting closed. "What is this power?" Azrael breathed, his serene mask finally cracking with disbelief. "It is not demonic. You lecture me about what I am." Naruto snarled, rising to his feet. He was radiating an aura of such intensity that the very air around him was shimmering. Golden energy, thick and viscous as honey, cloaked his body. A monster, a sin, an anomaly. He clenched his fists, and the golden energy exploded outward, taking shape. It formed a colossal avatar, a spectral body of golden light that towered over the academy. It was shaped like a warrior, clad in intricate armor, but behind it, 9 long, flowing tails of pure energy whipped through the air. The Kurama avatar, reborn not from a demon's chakra, but from the life force of Naruto's very soul. "I decide what I am," he bellowed, his voice and the avatar's voice speaking as one, a sound that shook the heavens and made the angelic host falter in their attack. Inside the golden titan's head, Naruto stood, his eyes blazing. He had merged his demon lord potential with the sage energy of his soul, achieving a state that was neither and both. He was not a demon lord. He was not a sage. He was something new. Azrael stared up at the colossal form, his sorrowful expression replaced by one of grim determination. "The corruption has reached its final stage. It mimics the divine." He raised his hands, and a spear of brilliant white light, 100 times larger and more powerful than the one from the island, formed in his grasp. Quote, "Then I will pass judgment upon a false god." He hurled the spear. It flew through the air, a streak of white lightning intent on piercing the heart of the golden avatar. Naruto didn't even try to block it. He had the avatar raise its own hand. 5 golden claws of energy reached out and simply caught the spear of divine judgment in mid-flight. The spear struggled, pulsing with power, but it was held fast. "My turn," Naruto growled. He formed a Rasengan in the avatar's other hand. But it wasn't the small sphere from his duel with Levi. It was a gigantic, sun-sized vortex of swirling energy. And it wasn't just crimson. It was a perfect fusion of his 2 powers, a chaotic spiral of crimson destruction, stabilized and contained by an outer shell of golden life energy. It was a tailed beast bomb Rasengan, a perfect balance of creation and annihilation. He didn't throw it. He had the avatar step forward and slam it down onto Azrael. Azrael, for the first time, knew fear. He tried to erect a barrier, to teleport. But it was too late. The attack was too fast, too vast. He was engulfed. The impact was silent. There was no explosion, no shockwave. The golden crimson sphere simply expanded, and everything within its radius was subjected to a paradoxical command: be unmade, and be reborn. Azrael's holy armor, his very form, was simultaneously torn apart by the destructive crimson energy and forcibly regenerated by the creative golden energy, over and over, thousands of times in a single second. It was an agony beyond comprehension. When the light faded, the quadrangle was a perfectly smooth, glassy crater. At its center, Azrael was on one knee, his divine armor shattered, pieces of it flaking off like dust. Light bled from a dozen wounds, and his serene face was contorted in pain and disbelief. He had not just been defeated. He had been dominated, humiliated. High above, the angelic host froze, their hive mind reeling from the feedback of their leader's utter defeat. They stared down at the Golden Titan, this false god who had laid low their angel of judgment, and they felt an emotion that was utterly alien to them: terror. Naruto, from within the avatar, glared down at the broken angel. He could have ended him. One more attack, and Azrael would have been erased. But he saw the look in the angel's eyes. Not of malice, but of shattered conviction. Of a zealot who had just seen his god bleed. The golden avatar slowly dissolved, fading into motes of light that rained down over the academy, mending the broken buildings, healing the wounded. Naruto landed softly on the ground, the immense power receding, leaving him weary but standing tall. He walked up to the kneeling Azrael. "Go home," Naruto said, his voice quiet but ringing with the authority of his victory. "Telephone. Tell your masters that this world is under my protection. If you come back, I won't be this merciful." Azrael stared at him, his mind struggling to reconcile the monstrous power he had just faced with the act of mercy he was now being shown. This was not the behavior of a mindless, destructive demon lord. This was the act of a king. Without a word, Azrael and his battered, terrified host opened a gateway and retreated. Vanishing from the sky, silence fell over the Royal Biblia Academy. The battle was over. The students, professors, and defenders stared, not at the retreating angels, but at the lone figure of Naruto Uzumaki. Standing in the center of the devastation he had both caused and contained. Lilith, Levi, and Arin ran to him. They weren't afraid. They were awestruck. They had just witnessed the truth of him. They had seen the beast, the monster, that the world feared, and they saw that its fury was born from a fierce, desperate love for them, for his home. The roar of the beast was the sound of a guardian's heart. In that moment, their bonds with him were sealed in fire and faith. He wasn't just a student, a comrade, or a partner. He was their center, their sovereign, the one they would follow into any fire, against any god. Azrael, back in his sterile celestial fortress, received his new orders. The highest echelons of his order had witnessed the battle through his eyes. They had seen the golden avatar. They had felt the power of Vita. "The analysis is complete," a disembodied voice echoed through the fortress. "The anomaly is not just a demon lord candidate. He has fused with a remnant of the first, the original power of creation. He is a potential nexus point, capable of rewriting the laws of reality itself. The previous directive is void. He is no longer a blight to be purged. He is a prize to be captured. He must be taken, studied, and his power repurposed for the great order. The war is no longer about purgation. It is about acquisition." Azrael looked at his shattered armor. The memory of that overwhelming power still searing his soul. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated, and infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Scars of Gold and Whispers of the Heart. The aftermath of a battle against angels is not quiet. The academy was a hive of activity, a frantic scramble of healers tending to the wounded, magi repairing the shattered wards, and scholars trying to comprehend the sheer impossibility of what they had just witnessed. The crater in the main quadrangle, perfectly smooth and glassy, was roped off like a holy site. A stark monument to Naruto's victory. He was no longer a subject of fear or even awe, he was a figure of myth, spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. The uncrowned king who had dethroned an angel. But victory carried a heavy price. The strain of manifesting the Nine Tails avatar, of fusing the destructive power of a demon lord with the creative energy of his soul, had left Naruto utterly drained. It was a soul-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. The golden power had healed his physical wounds, but the spiritual backlash was immense. It felt like every cell in his body was a frayed nerve ending. He had retreated from the noise and the reverence, seeking solitude. He found it on the roof of the library, one of the few tall buildings that had remained largely unscathed. He sat on the edge, his legs dangling over the side, watching the controlled chaos of the cleanup below. The sky was clear, the twin moons casting a serene, silver light over the floating island. It was peaceful, but he couldn't feel it. His mind was a maelstrom, replaying the fight, Azrael's words echoing in his ears. A monster who wears the mask of a hero. He had won, but the angel's accusation had struck a nerve deep in the bedrock of his soul. He had unleashed a power so vast it terrified even him. He had dominated his enemy, reveled in it for a moment, and in doing so, felt a chilling kinship with the very monsters he had spent his first life fighting. The line between guardian and destroyer had never felt so thin. A faint sound, a slight displacement of air behind him, broke his reverie. He didn't need to turn. He knew that signature, that fluid grace. "Nice view," Levi Kazama said, her voice softer than usual. She walked up and sat beside him on the ledge, her own legs dangling into the abyss. The usual sharp, teasing smirk was absent, replaced by a quiet, appraising look. "It's quiet," Naruto replied, his voice rough with fatigue. They sat in silence for a long time, a comfortable quiet that needed no words. It was the silence of two warriors who understood the toll of battle. Levi wasn't there to celebrate the victory or ask about his power. She was there because she knew what came after the adrenaline faded. The exhaustion, the doubt, the quiet ache. "You know," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the horizon, "when I challenged you to that duel, I thought you were just another arrogant powerhouse. Another magus who confused raw strength for skill." Naruto remained silent, letting her speak. "But then we fought," she continued, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "And you didn't just overpower me. You outthought me. You used tricks, feints, clones, you fought like a shinobi. You understood the rhythm of it. The dance." She turned her head to look at him, her blue eyes clear and serious. "And today, I saw you fight an army of those freaks. You weren't just throwing power around. You were protecting everyone. Every move was about shielding us, buying us time, drawing the big guy's fire." He finally met her gaze. "He was going to kill you all to get to me. I couldn't let that happen." "I know," she said softly. "Most powerful people I've met, they fight to prove they're strong. You fight because you have to. Because you can't stand the thought of anyone else getting hurt." She nudged his shoulder with her own, a simple, comradely gesture. "That fighting spirit, the will to stand up for your people, no matter the odds, it's inspiring. It makes me want to be stronger, faster. It makes me want to stand by your side and watch your back." Her confession was stripped of all flirtation and banter. It was a raw, honest admission from one warrior to another. This was the core of their connection, forged not in sweet words but in the crucible of combat. He was the first person she'd met who possessed not just the power, but the indomitable spirit of a true protector, a spirit she recognized and revered. Naruto felt a knot of tension in his chest loosen. Her words were a balm, a quiet affirmation that cut through the echo of Israel's accusations. He wasn't a monster in her eyes. He was a comrade. "Thanks, Levi," he said, the words feeling inadequate. He offered her a small, tired smile. "I'm glad you're here." Her smile returned, a little of its old sharpness coming back. "Yeah, well, someone has to make sure our walking tactical nuke doesn't get himself killed. Don't get used to me being this sentimental, Uzumaki." She didn't leave. She just sat with him, a silent sentinel sharing the quiet vigil, their shoulders occasionally brushing. In the shared stillness, a bond that had been forged in respect was now tempered into a deep, unwavering loyalty. He had found his shadow, his blade in the dark. An hour later, after Levi had finally departed with a promise to bring him something to eat, another presence found him. This time, it was a quiet, measured footstep. Arin Kanazuki approached, carrying a heavy, leather-bound book in her arms. She stopped a respectful distance away. "Your energy signature is fluctuating," she stated, her voice its usual monotone, but her violet eyes were filled with an analytical concern. "The fusion of Superbia and Vita archives is unstable. It is causing a recursive spiritual backlash. You are, in layman's terms, tearing yourself apart from the inside out." "I feel fine," Naruto lied, shifting on the ledge. "Your statement is a logical fallacy," she countered, stepping closer. "My analysis indicates a 78% probability of permanent soul damage if you attempt to manifest that level of power again without proper regulation." She held out the book. It was ancient, its cover worn smooth with age. "This is the Codex Vitae. A forbidden grimoire detailing the theoretical principles of the Life Archive. It was sealed in the headmaster's private vault. I procured it. Naruto looked from the book to her face. You stole it. The term, procured, is more accurate, as my clearance is a Trin. ITY7 and your designated partner grants me tertiary access rights. I merely expedited the authorization process, she said, a subtle evasiveness in her tone that was almost humorous. The headmaster was distracted. He took the book. It was heavy, and it hummed with a faint, warm energy that resonated with the golden power within him. Why? Arin adjusted her glasses, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a sign of her processing a difficult emotional concept. The data from your battle was inconclusive. You demonstrated a power that defies all known laws of magic. You defeated an entity that should have been your conceptual counter. Your actions were, for the entirety of the engagement, logically indefensible for self-preservation. She paused, taking a breath. But they were flawlessly consistent with your stated objective, protecting your chosen people. My logic is insufficient to model your behavior. My systems are failing to categorize my own reactions to it. She looked directly at him. And for the first time, he saw a crack in her perfect, placid facade. He saw genuine, profound confusion. I find myself wanting you to succeed. I find myself worried about the spiritual backlash you are experiencing. These are not logical responses. They are emotional, and emotion is a variable I cannot compute. Naruto finally understood. She wasn't just bringing him a book to solve a magical problem. She was bringing him a problem of her own, one she couldn't solve with her intellect. She was asking for help. He closed the heavy codex and set it beside him. Emotion isn't a flaw in logic, Arin. He said gently. It's just a different kind of truth. You don't compute it. You feel it. You worry about me because you see me as a person, a comrade, not just a subject to be analyzed. You want me to succeed because you've chosen to stand with me. He tapped the cover of the codex. You brought me this not because it was the logical solution, but because you hoped it would help me. That hope, that's the part that matters. Arin stared at him, her mind, which could process thousand-year-old magical texts in an instant, struggling to process his simple words. He wasn't dismissing her confusion. He was giving it a name. He was validating it. He was seeing her, the girl behind the logic engine, and telling her it was okay to feel. Hope, she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. An irrational emotional state based on a desired outcome with a low probability of success. Or, Naruto countered with a small smile, it's the reason we get up and fight when logic tells us we're going to lose. A faint, almost imperceptible blush colored her cheeks. She had spent her life in a world of absolute truths and logical axioms. He was introducing her to a world of maybes, of faith, of feelings. It was terrifying, and it was the most compelling thing she had ever encountered. The bond between them, which had started as a challenge to her identity, was now evolving into something more. He was not just her partner. He was her teacher, guiding her through the illogical, chaotic, and beautiful landscape of the human heart. The last visitor came near dawn. The sky was beginning to pale from black to a deep indigo. He heard her approach from the stairwell door, her steps heavier than usual. Lilith Asami looked as exhausted as he felt. Her usual immaculate uniform was rumpled. There were dark circles under her eyes, but she held 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She walked over and handed him one. It was rich, dark tea. The headmaster is stable, she said, her voice weary. His connection to his magic is shattered, but he's alive. He's retiring. He appointed me acting headmistress before he passed out. Naruto took a sip of the tea, the warmth a small comfort. That's a heavy burden. Tell me about it, she said with a humorless laugh. She sat down next to him, close enough that their knees were almost touching. She stared into her mug, her reflection distorted in the dark liquid. I came up here to give you the official report. To talk about rebuilding, about the new political landscape. To be the headmistress. She sighed, a long, shuddering breath. But I can't. Not right now. She looked at him, and the mask of the professor, the Trinity 7, the acting headmistress, was completely gone. All that was left was Lilith. A tired, scared, and profoundly grateful woman. When that angel had me in those chains, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I thought it was over. I felt his power, and I knew there was nothing in our world that could stand against it. I invoked the right of Aegis, staking my life on you, and I thought, this is it. We made a good stand, but this is the end. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. And then you roared. And the chains turned to dust. You rose up, a golden god, and you fought him. You fought for me, for all of us. Naruto looked away, out at the horizon. He was hurting you, he said, his voice thick. I wasn't going to let that stand. I know, she whispered. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently placed it on his arm. Her touch was warm, grounding. Naruto, I've spent my life around power. I've studied it, taught it, wielded it. And I've always been a little bit afraid of it. Afraid of what it does to people. But your power, as terrifying as it was, I wasn't afraid. Not for a second, because I saw its source. It wasn't ego. It wasn't a desire for destruction. It was love. A fierce, terrible, beautiful love. He finally turned to look at her. In her crimson eyes, he saw no fear, no reverence. He saw a deep, aching understanding. He saw a reflection of the same burdens he carried. On a sudden impulse, driven by a need for connection that was stronger than his doubt, he spoke. There was a friend, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Back home. My best friend. He was like a brother to me. Lilith listened, her hand still on his arm. Her expression softening with empathy. He was consumed by hatred, by a desire for power to avenge his past. I spent years trying to bring him back. To save him. Naruto's voice cracked. In the end, I couldn't. The only way to stop him, to save our world, was to end it. I failed him. I failed to save the most important person in my life. He finally said it. The truth that haunted his soul since the moment he was reborn. The failure that drove his every action. Azrael was right, he choked out, the words tasting like poison. My existence causes suffering. People get hurt because of me. Lilith's grip on his arm tightened. She moved closer, her presence a shield against his despair. He wasn't right, she said, her voice fierce with conviction. He was a zealot who could only see the world in black and white. You didn't fail your friend, Naruto. You made an impossible choice. The kind of choice that real leaders, real heroes, are forced to make. The kind of choice that haunts you forever, but saves everyone else. She used her free hand to gently turn his face toward her. You are not a catalyst for suffering. You are a beacon of hope in a world that has forgotten what that looks like. You carry the weight of your past not as a chain, but as a shield to protect others from the same fate. Don't you dare let that fanatic poison the best part of you. He looked into her eyes. And he saw a strength that matched his own, a compassion that soothed the ragged edges of his soul. The pretense of teacher and student was a distant memory. They were two wounded veterans, finding solace in each other's scars. The distance between them vanished. He didn't know who moved first. His head tilted down, hers tilted up. Their lips were a breath apart, the air electric with unspoken emotion. With shared burdens and a deep, blossoming affection. This was it, the culmination of everything. The respect, the loyalty, the sacrifice. And then, he pulled back. Just a fraction of an inch. She blinked, a question in her eyes. Not yet, he whispered, his voice hoarse. This, us, it deserves more than a stolen moment on a rooftop when we're both broken. He wanted their first kiss to be a celebration. Not a consolation. A beginning, not an escape. Lilith searched his eyes and understood. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, a smile of pure, unadulterated warmth that made her look years younger. She didn't feel rejected. She felt cherished. Okay, she whispered back. But don't make me wait too long, Uzumaki. She leaned in and placed a soft, gentle kiss on his cheek. A promise of what was to come. In these 3 quiet moments, in the aftermath of a war against heaven, Naruto's harem was truly formed. Not by a declaration or a magical pact, but by individual, intimate connections. Levi, the warrior who stood by his side. Arin, the logician who embraced the irrationality of hope for him. And Lilith, the queen who had risked everything for him and now saw the man behind the myth. They were not just followers drawn to his power. They were his pillars. his court, his reason to fight, and with them by his side, he finally felt ready for the war that was to come. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Declaration of the Sovereign and the Dawn of War. The week following Israel's retreat was a fragile, deceptive calm. The Royal Biblia Academy, under the new and decisive leadership of acting headmistress Lilith Asami, was a whirlwind of focused activity. The physical damage was repaired with astonishing speed, magi from every department working in concert. But the psychological and political damage ran far deeper. The world's magical factions were in turmoil. They had witnessed, through long-range scrying and panicked reports, a power that dwarfed their own humble arsenals. They had seen a godlike entity defeated, not by a coalition of their greatest archmagi, but by a single, 17-year-old boy. The fear that had driven them to dem and Naruto be sealed was now transmuted into a different, more insidious kind of terror. What do you do with a weapon you can't control, but can't afford to be without? The answer, for many, was to try and claim it. Lilith's office, formerly the headmaster's, was now the war room. A massive floating map of the world dominated the center of the room, magical hotspots and political boundaries glowing with faint light. She stood before it, looking exhausted but resolute, flanked by Levi and Arin. Naruto was there too, leaning against a bookshelf, the ancient Codex Vitae in his hand. He wasn't just reading it, he was absorbing it, its golden runed pages turning on their own as he devoured the lost theories of life magic. The reports are in, Lilith said, her voice sharp and clear, devoid of weariness she had shown on the rooftop. This was the headmistress speaking. Lord Valerius and the Royal Liber Academy have publicly condemned us for harboring a rogue entity and provoking a celestial war. They're using the attack to justify their original position. They're trying to politically isolate us. Cowards, Levi spat, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. They're scared of the angels. And they're even more scared of Naruto. So they're going to hide behind their walls and point fingers. Their position is tactically unsound but politically motivated, Arin added, her gaze fixed on the glowing map. They seek to frame Royal Biblia as the source of the problem, thereby deflecting the chains of Samael's attention onto us and away from themselves. A logical, if morally bankrupt, strategy of self-preservation. Quote, "It's worse than that," Lilith said, tapping a region on the map that flared red. "The Ishkarioth Magacracy has been silent, but our intelligence suggests they're mobilizing their acquisition teams. They don't want to seal Naruto. They want to vivisect him. They see his fusion of powers as the next step in magical evolution and they want to unlock its secrets, no matter the cost to him." Naruto finally looked up from the book. He closed it with a soft snap. "So, one side wants to chain me, the other wants to dissect me, and everyone else is hiding under their beds." Sounds familiar. His tone was dangerously calm. He had spent the last week not just healing, but thinking. He had looked into the abyss of his own power and had come to a decision. He would not be a pawn in their games of fear and ambition. "There's more," Lilith said, her expression grim. "The headmaster's network is still active. I've just received a priority summons. Valerius has convened a global summit via magical broadcast. He's going to make his case to every magical leader on the planet. He's going to demand the world unite against you. Let him," Naruto said, pushing off the bookshelf. He walked towards the map, his presence commanding the attention of the room. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a clarity and a purpose that was almost tangible. The Emperor Tama was not just a name. It was the core of his being, and it was radiating from him now, a quiet but absolute authority. "We can't let them isolate us, Naruto," Levi argued. "If the whole world turns against us, not even you can fight them and the angels at the same time." "We won't be isolated," Naruto said, his eyes fixed on the map. He looked at Lilith. "This broadcast, can you hijack it?" Lilith blinked, startled by the audacity of the question. Hijack a global magical broadcast secured by the Archmagi of the Liber Academy. The energy requirements, the complexity of the spell breaking, it's theoretically possible. But it would be the most difficult piece of magic I have ever attempted. "Can you do it?" he repeated, his gaze intense. She met his stare, and in it, she saw no doubt, only a plan. A plan he hadn't shared. but one she instinctively trusted. The Aegis rune on her hand pulsed with a faint warmth. With Arin providing the energy calculations and Levi running interference on their security sweeps, yes. We can do it. Good, Naruto said. He turned to the three of them, his royal court, his pillars. Valerius wants to make his case. Fine, we'll let him. And when he's done, when he's spread all his fear and paranoia, we're going to give them our response. The broadcast began as a show of force. Lord Valerius's image, stern and imposing, appeared in scrying pools, enchanted mirrors, and holographic displays in every magical sanctuary on earth. He stood in Liber's own grand sanctum, a chamber of white marble and gold, designed to project wealth and power. He spoke for nearly an hour, his voice a masterclass in political rhetoric. He painted Naruto as a cataclysm, a walking apocalypse whose very presence had invited ruin. He showed magical recordings of the angelic attack, edited, of course, to emphasize the destruction and omit Naruto's role in protecting the students. He spoke of the heretical nature of Naruto's power, the uncontrollable ego of his Tama. His solution was an ultimatum. The world's magi must unite, form a grand alliance, march on royal Biblia, and forcibly take the anomaly into custody. For the good of all. As he spoke, fear and panic began to take hold. In council chambers across the globe, leaders nodded in grim agreement. Valerius was offering them a scapegoat, a target for their terror. It was an easy path, and many were ready to take it. In Lilith's office, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Arin was a blur of motion, her hands flying over a complex runic console, diverting massive amounts of energy from the Academy's core. Levi stood guard, her senses spread wide, her hands glowing as she dismantled Liber's magical security wards one by one. Lilith stood at the center of a maelstrom of crimson energy, her brow beaded with sweat, her fingers weaving the most intricate spell of her life. Their source code is breaking. Levi snapped. Arin, I need more power to the decryption matrix. Diverting now, Arin said, her voice strained. Core temperature is approaching critical. We have a 47-second window before overload. It's enough, Lilith said through gritted teeth. I have it. I have control of the signal. She looked at Naruto, who was waiting calmly by the door. It's all yours. Make it count. Just as Valerius was about to deliver his final, thunderous call to arms, his image flickered. It stuttered, dissolved into static, and was replaced. The new image was of the Royal Biblia Library's rooftop, at dawn. The view was breathtaking, a sky of brilliant orange and pink. And in the center of the frame stood Naruto Uzumaki. He wasn't in a position of power, not standing behind a podium. He was just there, the wind gently rustling his jacket. But his presence was immense. It filled the screen, silencing a world of argument. To his right stood Lilith Asami, her crimson hair like a banner, the Aegis rune on her hand glowing softly. To his left, Arin Kanazuki, her placid express, ion an unnerving counterpoint to the power she radiated. Behind them, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed, was Levi Kazama, her sharp grin a clear and present threat. They were not a council. They were a court, a sovereign and his chosen. Naruto let the silence stretch, letting the world absorb the image. He had their complete, undivided attention. Then, he spoke. His voice was not loud, not angry. It was calm, clear, and carried an unshakable weight of command. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he began. Lord Valerius has just told you that I am a monster. A plague, a cataclysm that must be chained for your own safety. He took a step forward. He is right about one thing. I am not like you. My power does not conform to your archives. My will does not bend to your laws. And I not come to this world to be your student, your weapon, or your sacrifice. His gaze seemed to bore through the screen, to meet the eyes of every leader watching. You have been given a choice by Lord Valerius. Hide behind his walls and pray, or join him in a foolish crusade to put chains on me. He offers you the illusion of safety, the comfort of a scapegoat. I am here to offer you the truth. He raised his hand, and a small, perfect Rasengan of fused crimson and gold energy spun to life in his palm, a miniature star of creation and destruction. Another enemy is coming. The chains of Samael. They are not like me. They do not offer choices. They offer only judgment. They see your magic, your very way of life, as a disease to be purged. They will not stop with me. They will burn your academies, slaughter your people, and sterilize your world in the name of their sterile, passionless God. And they will do it while you are busy fighting me. He let the miniature star in his palm dissolve. Lord Valerius offers you a war against a phantom menace of his own creation. I am offering you a war for your very survival. He paused, letting the stark reality of his words sink in. This is not a negotiation. It is not a request for aid. It is a declaration. His voice hardened, the full force of his imperatima resonating in every syllable. I am a sovereign power. My territory is this academy. And my people are any who wish to live free from the sterile peace of zealots and the fearful tyranny of cowards. I am building an army. I am preparing for war. And I will stand against the chains of Samael. He looked directly into the camera, his golden sage eyes blazing to life for a brief, stunning moment. You have a choice. Stand with me, and fight for your future. Or stand aside, and be swept away by the coming storm. But make no mistake. If you choose to stand against me, if you join Valerius's crusade, I will consider you no different from the angels. I will not be chained. I will not be your sacrifice. He gave them no time to process, no time to debate. He had delivered his truth, his declaration, his ultimatum. With a final, piercing look, he turned his back. Lilith, Arin, and Levi fell into step with him, their unified presence a final, silent statement of power. The broadcast cut to black. Stunned silence. In council chambers and sanctums across the planet, the world's most powerful magi sat in absolute, deafening quiet. They had been prepared for a debate, for an argument. They had not been prepared for a declaration of sovereignty. He hadn't asked for their help. He had simply informed them of the new world order and dared them to defy it. He had seized the narrative, seized the power, and drawn a battle line not between himself and them, but between the living and the dead. In his opulent sanctum, Lord Valerius stared at the blank scrying pool, his face pale, his body trembling with a rage that left him speechless. He had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. He had tried to paint Naruto as a monster, and in response, Naruto had declared himself a king. The final scene cuts. Azrael stands in his celestial fortress, a vast, sterile cathedral of white light and crystal. Before him, a host of angelic warriors, their numbers now in the thousands, stands at perfect attention. He is watching the end of Naruto's broadcast on a holographic display. He sees the declaration. He sees the uncrowned king in his royal court. He sees the unshakable will. A profound sadness fills his features. He turns to his lieutenants, his voice a whisper that carries the weight of ages. The cycle repeats. He has declared himself a king. He builds his court. The corruption has taken root, and he has embraced it as his truth. He looks out at the sea of waiting angels. His own divine power now fully restored, but his spirit forever scarred by his defeat. He understands now. Naruto Uzumaki cannot be broken. He cannot be reasoned with from their perspective. He must be faced. Prepare for purgation, Azrael commands, his voice no longer sorrowful, but hard as diamond, filled with the cold, clear light of absolute purpose. The world has chosen its champion. Now, it must face its judgment. The camera pulls back, showing Azrael's vast army, a terrifying wave of divine might, preparing to be unleashed. The final shot returns to the rooftop of the Royal Biblia Academy. Naruto stands with Lilith, Arin, and Levi, the rising sun at their backs. The world's magi are in stunned silence, a planet holding its breath. He has declared war on a godlike entity, challenged the established order, and in doing so, has seized his own destiny. The first act is over. The dawn of a new war has begun. Chapter 7 End.